Welcome to the Legendary Upside podcast. My name is Pat Crane. You can follow all of my content at legendaryupside.com. With me today, JJ Zachariason. We're going to be talking JJ's late round prospect guide, diving into the rookie class. JJ, how's it going?
It's good, man. It's good. Have people been commenting on how great your hair is recently?
I have gotten some comments
It's
because
good, man. It's good stuff.
it's just sort of a mess.
It's
It's always
amazing.
a little bit of a different mess every time.
Yeah.
So,
It's
yeah.
great. It's great. I saw because I wasn't able to make the ship chasing rookie draft this year, and
I had a good. It's a sort of similar look.
yeah, right,
to that
right.
stream.
So I did get like 10 minutes to log on really quick, and then I got to chime in and say, hey, thanks for the invite, guys, even though you did invite me to do it. And I saw, and I was like, man, he's looking great. The dad, it's the dad glow up going on right now.
Yeah, it is. It is very much the dad glow up. Not a lot of sleep. The hair gets bushier the less sleep you get. That's how it works. Yeah. So you actually had a post this morning on Luther Burden, diving into your thoughts on him, because you have this ZAP score that drives the order that we see these prospects in your rookie guide. Not necessarily your rookie rankings though.
Yeah.
But Luther Burden is the number one wide receiver in the ZAP model. He ranks pretty well for me as well, but the more you look under the hood,
Yeah.
the scarier it gets with kind of how the production, like high level 3-year guy, breakout and all the good stuff, but how it happened is kind of concerning. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I actually want to at some point, I don't know how I would do this, but I'm really curious if my changes in rank, because I use my ZAP model as like a guide for my rankings, right? Like it's to make sure that I'm not getting too high or too low on guys at the end of the day. And so I'm really curious to see what shifts I made in rankings versus what the ZAP model is saying and how bad of an idea that actually was, because there's been instances where it's been a bad idea, but there's also been instances where it was a good idea. So I
IKB down on Brian Thomas last year from mine.
Yeah,
so
right.
I should have trusted. I should have trusted it.
Yeah, I just feel like there's instances where we can be I'm sure it's like a moot point at the end of the day, and it all evens out at the end. But yeah, I mean, right now he has a score of 96.5, which I'm now categorizing the scores in this year's iteration of the guide so that people can kind of get wrap their head around what that means. So he's still in the elite producer category. There's a decent amount of elite producers. It's the parameters I used are relatively subjective, but I wanted to make sure that, people see a score of 65 to 60. It's a lot different than a score of 95 to 100, when 65 to 60 is really not that different. Whereas 95 to 100 is we're talking Jamar Chase versus, a Luther Burden-y type player, which there is, from a risk profile standpoint, a pretty big difference. But yeah, I mean, in the model, right, I'm using breakout score, which is receiving yards per team pass attempt, which is adjusted for age, and then it's adjusted for program strength as well. And, Burden had his sophomore season, so obviously he had the age-adjusted production. It was a really good season in receiving yards per team pass attempt. He had a 3.21 rate. And then he played at Mizzou, and they had a pretty tough schedule that year, just given their opponents and stuff. And so that actually looked closer to 3.37 than 3.21 to the model. So not only is he doing really well within the metric, but he's doing that at a young age, right? And he's not even he's a younger-ish guy. He was a younger-ish sophomore, versus others too. The problem is that, so the ZAP model sees it and it's okay, sophomore year breakout, really good breakout score. It was a 96.3 breakout score, which there's only been 33 that have been over 95 in the ZAP model's history, which goes back to 2011. And so he looks good. He has rushing production, which is the other main production input for the wide receiver model. I don't look at the degree in which the guy had rushing production. It's usually there's certain areas where they'll get points or scored for it, right? So if they're over X number of yards in their career,
he's a versatile type of
Type of guy. It's just because it's interesting, because one of the guys in the email blast that I had sent about Burden, one of the guys that he usage wise and production wise does comp really closely to is Wan'Dale Robinson, but Wan'Dale Robinson also had 600 some rushing yards in college, right? Because he played that kind of dual threat role. Whereas Burden was at 200. It's not so Wan'Dale didn't get extra juice because he had 600 yards. It's more so just seeing that they had some sort of rushing profile to then say, okay, you get a little bit of a boost from that in ZAP score. It's not nearly as important as breakout score is. So like Burden had the rushing production, he had the great breakout score. And so the model's like, oh yeah, this guy's good. Like no matter where he gets drafted, pretty much he's going to be looked at as like a value for that NFL team, according to the model. Right. But then you look at sort of the actual usage and how he was deployed. You have a pretty high slot rate, which I'm not that concerned. Like some people get really concerned about high slot rates. I'm not massively concerned when, we've seen plenty of, when draft capital is there, we've seen plenty of, Jalen Waddle, AJ Brown, guys who had like 60% plus type slot rates in college.
I mean, Justin Jefferson was like, that was the big knock. He was a slot.
Right. Exactly. So like, I'm not that concerned about that side of things. I do think that he, unlike an AJ Brown who had like massive size, Burden has decent size. So I'm more, like AJ Brown, you're like, yeah, he can probably play on the perimeter because he's got this like 225-pound frame. Whereas with Luther Burden, you're like, okay, maybe he's just a slot guy at the NFL. Maybe he's like a Keenan Allen type role, 50-50, or an Amon-Ra St. Brown type role, 50-50 inside out, whatever. Or even more on the inside. But the biggest problem is that over 32% of his targets were behind the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, that's the big one to me.
Yeah.
56% of his career yak was behind the line of scrimmage.
Yeah. And so like there's that, there's, his intermediate routes, his 10 to 19 yard targets were really low. So he was basically boom or bust in terms of where those targets were coming from. And I know, a lot of people have talked about like slot fade data and stuff and like deep targets out of the slot. It's basically like what a lot of the deep work he was seeing was coming from because he lined up in the slot so much. And so you don't have a profile where there's that much intermediate work, which is where we kind of want wide receivers to live in, like from a fantasy perspective and stuff. Like it's a really, because those are going to be the guys that get peppered with looks in the NFL, right?
Yeah, it seems safe to be able to get open in the intermediate area, but there's also like a lot of upside. You play in PPR leagues or at least half point PPR, so it's like you want a guy who can earn a bunch of targets. He had pretty poor numbers, both from yak and yards. If you look at short, intermediate, and deep, especially intermediate and deep, I've got so he kind of profiles as a gadget player, looking at like just how much of his yak was behind the line of scrimmage, but he also concerningly throws up another red flag for me, where I look at guys who had a high contested target rates on their deep targets, and then didn't have awesome contested catch rates. So, like, it's okay to be T. Higgins.
Right.
But you better be T. Higgins at the catch point if you're not going to get separation downfield.
Right.
42% of his career deep targets were contested. That's, for a guy who's not drawing targets downfield, that's a big concern to me. Like, is he actually, like, a good enough route runner downfield to get open, or is this kind of an athlete who you, like, find ways to get the ball in his hands?
Yeah, I think it's all valid. That's like Treylon Burks and Quentin Johnston issues that they had.
Jalen Reagor, maybe.
Jalen Reagor issues that they had. Like, I think that's all valid. This is why, like, I sent that blast out today, and it was more so just like, let's be open-ended about this, more than me saying, like, you got to go after Burden or you got to fade Burden. Because I do think, another thing that people have gripes about, which I actually don't, I care, but not that much, is the drop off in production from sophomore to junior year. And I say that because I have just found that spike seasons, I wrote in the newsletter, I was like, peaks are more important than valleys when we're looking at prospecting. Right. So like, yes, we want to have like a safer projection. It's just easier to have that safe projection. But when it comes to how these guys are producing, when you get those elite seasons at a young age. So I'm not talking like Xavier Legette, right? Where it happened, his fifth year in college. I'm talking about like sophomore year production, like the Juju Smith-Schuster thing that we saw. And there've been 10 wide receivers since 2011 drafted in the top 2 rounds where they had a max season yards per team pass attempt above 3. And then the final season that dropped by a full yard or more. So they basically had like this really big peak season, but their last year in college wasn't that strong. And you look at there's some misses like Laviska Shenault or Tutu Atwell. Tutu Atwell obviously just being massively overdrafted to begin with. But you get
he's pretty good for like 155-pound guy.
Yeah, right, right. But you get like, Jonathan Baldwin also a miss, but you get like Alshon Jeffrey, Justin Blackmon's in there, who I think would have been probably good if not for off the field stuff. Tyler Boyd, who was a really good, solid second rounder. Juju Smith-Schuster, Chris Olave, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. Like JSN had
and Jamar Chase didn't play in his final season.
Jamar Chase didn't even play. I was gonna add him to it because he technically popped up in the query, but I was like, I can't.
But isn't it funny that like because he just didn't play, people are like, it's fine. But if he'd had like a slightly worse season, they were like, oh, he's not so good.
That's why I'm not that concerned about that part, right? I think with Burden, though, what this comes down to, number one, I don't think this wide receiver class is that special, right? So if you're ranking wide receivers versus wide receivers, I can make an argument easily for Burden to be someone's wide receiver one. If you don't, if you take out Travis Hunter, especially, right? Like I can at least see that argument. I had Tet above Burden in my personal rankings only because there was more of that consistency, more of that general, like what we see wide receivers from a usage perspective get. And I don't really vibe with like the Wan'Dale Robinson, Rondale Moore, maybe Paris Campbell, you could say, but the difference between you take that gadgety slot guy archetype, right? Those three guys. And I think there was another one that I had mentioned Kadarius Toney was another one.
Yeah. Oh,
right.
God. Okay.
These gadgety players who, played a lot in the slot, got some manufactured touches, a lot of looks behind the line of scrimmage. There are differences. Now, again, if you look at like production and usage, I think that Wan'Dale Robinson does line up pretty well with Luther Burden, but think of like Luther Burden as a Wan'Dale Robinson that has 25 extra pounds and 4 more inches, right?
Yeah.
And arguably more, obviously
more explosive, I think.
Yeah, way better size speed. So like, I don't know if that's really that bad of a player from a fantasy production standpoint.
Rotopat's comp is Percy Harvin.
Right.
He's a Mizzou guy.
Which is honestly a pretty good, that's what Thor Nystrom said on my show too. It's like, that's not a bad, especially like Percy Harvin could probably crush in today's game. Right. And so like, I think that's okay as long as you know what you're getting into. Because if you look at like some of these other usage comps, like a Rondale Moore, a Toney, or a Paris Campbell, none of them were nearly had nearly the kind of peak that Luther Burden had from a production standpoint. So I don't really think that they're, maybe you could argue Rondale Moore also smaller, right? And also, his usage, he didn't see like any deep looks at all in Purdue. Like he's a way different prospect in my opinion, which is why when you look at like my prospect guide and the comps that spit out, they're not based on where these guys lined up. They're based on size and breakout score and some of those higher level metrics. And that's where DJ Moore pops up. That's where Brandon Ayuk pops up. Like that.
DJ Moore's been the guy I've been kind of thinking of as like, who could he kind of be in the mold of as, as a hit. And that feels right to me where it's like, DJ Moore is a guy you do want to get on screens and isn't necessarily the most reliable target earner, but he's really, really explosive,
right?
And versatile. And kind of he's not like a kind of cookie cutter mold type of player.
No, but like, here's the thing too. When Brandon Ayuk came out, the same question marks were sitting there with Ayuk as they are with Luther Burden, where it's like, is he going to win against man? Is he going to be a good route runner?
Right.
Like, is he just a yak guy? Like, is he a gadgety kind of player? And then he worked on his craft and he got better. That was something that when I first, so I've been texting a lot with like Harmon while I was going through the wide receiver stuff. And for the guy, this is back in like February, and I'm just kind of like, hey, you got to watch this guy. You got to watch this guy. I'm curious if you want, et cetera. And I was sending him some comps, and the Burden comp of Ayuk came out, and he actually just published reception perception, and he shouted that out because he saw that too. Like it's a very like, that's why I think it's, and I said this in the newsletter too, it's somewhere in the middle of what we get from a Wan'Dale Robinson, beef that up a little bit, but also think about the ceiling of what we can see in like a DJ Moore or Brandon Ayuk, and that can turn people off. I think that's fine if it turns you off, if that's like more of the ceiling aspect. And again, like in the Zap model, I think it's looking more at ceiling because it's not giving you the usage context the way that we're giving it usage context. And I think that's fine. People are like, well, then why don't you add that to the model? And it's like, because you don't do that for one player. Like he's just a unique prospect, you know?
Right.
And it's okay to just say, hey, this is a really unique situation. We don't see this very often. And it can go in a lot of different directions. You know, I don't think it's a full fade just because it's a tough evaluation for how he's going to translate. I think it's more so we should think of this as there's a wide range of outcomes here that we need to recognize with a player like Burden.
Yeah, and he seems to be falling a little bit in the draft, like to where it originally it felt like he was a lock for the first round.
Yeah.
Now it feels like he and Ibuka, one of them probably goes first round, and maybe the other one falls out. But to the early second, not like a massive fall. But it seems like Golden has kind of jumped in and taken over the wide receiver 1 or the wide receiver 2 spot. And yeah, so that I guess I'm curious about, like, I know you have well, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have like kind of expected draft capital in here, right? In the model?
I do, yeah. And obviously, like the guide was published like March 13th or something like that. So like things have definitely changed since then in terms of projected capital. And I did a study on projected capital this year for the first time, instead of just like before I'm like, yeah, this is probably loosely, where these guys will get drafted. And it at least gives me something as a baseline, but I don't really care what their pre-draft scores are. I care about their post-draft scores.
Right.
But I did do the study this year where I looked at all of the NFL mock draft database data. Real draft capital is more predictive, but it's not really by much. And I actually am now incorporating the pre-draft draft capital, the big board draft capital in the running back model. It gets a 10% weight out of the actual and projected. And then if a player at wide receiver is a big reach, they will get knocked down in the model a little bit. So like Tutu Atwell was a big reach. There's others. Like it's wild how, because if you think about it logically too, like when an NFL team takes a wide receiver that was supposed to go in the 5th round in the 2nd round, that's one team doing that. But if the opposite happens, where Troy Franklin is projected to go in round 2 and he goes in round 4, that's a lot of teams passing up on that player. So he's probably not that good, right? And so that's where the reaching stuff comes into play. So like if some of these wideouts, I'm like way more interested in the mock draft data than I was any other time in my life, because if there are those reaches, I'm probably going to end up fading that wide receiver.
Kevin Cole talks about this as he kind of grades out the real life drafts, is that, there aren't values, but there are reaches.
Yes.
Because everything you're saying, like, it only takes one team to come up and be like, you know what, Tyquan Thornton's the guy. He's so fast. Didn't you see him run?
One of the guys on the list was Tyquan Thornton.
Did Velus Jones make it?
Yeah, he did actually. Yes.
But I mean, I think there definitely can be values, but like it's just harder for us to know, right? There's reasons that guys fall, like Jermaine Burton, right? It's like, oh man, what a value in the 3rd. Well, like actually not. There's a reason he fell. But we, the collective consciousness of trying to put together these rankings ahead of time, it would make sense to me that there's value in that. And then some team just goes rogue and reaches for a guy 2 rounds ahead.
Yeah, it's tough too, because like Dylan Sampson, for instance, doesn't look that amazing in the Zap model, because he doesn't have great receiving numbers, and we can talk about it, but like the running back model is like really receiving heavy. But he still ranks ahead of like other guys that I like more, and it's simply because of that draft capital. But when people are reading the pre-draft stuff, they don't have the draft capital context as concrete as we do after the draft, because after the draft, where they got drafted, right? So like if Dylan Sampson ranks ahead of like DJ Giddens or something, and then after the draft, you see that he went a full round or 2 ahead of him, then like, why that score is the way that it is. But right now it's a little bit more difficult to provide the context.
Yeah, I want to talk more about that element when we get to the running backs, because I'm kind of approaching it similarly with Sampson. He feels safer to me to go in that range. Just real quick on Burden to close out. I mean, we kind of made the bear case a little bit, but some other metrics on him. He had a 37% dominator rating as a sophomore. He didn't even turn 20 until December of that year. He had 3.29 yards per route run. He also had 2.32 yards per route run this past year, which is like not bad. I mean, we were AD Mitchell, I think was in like 1.8, and we're
Right.
like, yeah, no, he's sick. Like,
Exactly.
I agree with you. I think it's a wide range of outcomes. He's a scary player. Would like to see him with a coaching staff who's creative, and maybe he needs to add to his game, like you're saying with Brandon Ayuk. But that's why it's helpful for him to be 21 years old and to have already been super productive in college, and then he'll be a top 50 pick. So someone that I'm actually a little bit more excited about now that he's falling a little bit in the draft, I think is a second round pick. He'll probably be a little bit more palatable in rookie drafts and best ball drafts. Someone that I'd be a little bit afraid of if, like, on hype, he was going in like the 6th or 7th round of a best ball draft or something like that.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like I think that like another thing that when you do pre-draft stuff versus post-draft stuff with rankings is that I'm going to play it a little bit more conservatively with the running back stuff because I don't know which running backs are going to go day 2, right? And I know that there's a massive, massive difference between a guy going even in mid round 3 versus round 5, right? And so just in terms of hit rate and how valuable that is. So once we know where a lot of these like if we do get a big influx of running backs going day 2, we're going to be just pounding that position before wide receiver in rookie drafts, that like burden is going to just naturally fall because of that too. And then all of a sudden you're going to be into round 2 and you're like, all right, whatever. It's just a second round pick.
Right. Yeah. 100%. Let's talk Ted McMillan, who I've been still pretty bullish on. But I know, in looking at him, you've got to factor in that he was at Arizona, not the strongest, strength of program there. He was a big time recruit, and then like went to, play with his buddy who was his quarterback in high school. I think he said he's like caught a touchdown from that quarterback since like going back to grade school or something, which was kind of cool. But then also, like, when he's like on a Zoom talking about like how he hates watching film and never watches it, like him going to a worse program to play with his buddy, like kind of seems bad. So you can look at it both ways, but it's not like, do you view him differently than some of the other like smaller program prospects, given the recruiting profile was really strong?
I mean, look, I use, so like for the program adjustment stuff, I use College Football References, strength of schedule metric, and I convert it into a multiplier essentially. Right. And so with Tet at Arizona, and I do that like every season, it's not just like a blanket score for that school. It's for every season. So like, for instance, he had the same prorated yards per team pass attempt at 3.02 in his final 2 years. His first year was still fine at 1.53. It's not a bad for a freshman. That's great. But, it was over 3.02. And, as you know, and anyone that's looking at like receiving yards per team pass attempt, over 3 is really, really good if you're especially at like a big program. But even at Arizona, it's strong. And then that fell by 0.15 when adjusted for strength of opponent in both cases. So it was like the exact same thing happening both years for Tet. And so like, I look at him as, I know that like the Drake London comp is out there, and I think that that's pretty valid. I just don't think he's as good. Like I as of a prospect as London was. Like London's breakout score, which is a little bit better. He had a little bit better age adjusted production and program adjusted production. That's why like even in the prospect guide, like I have him more in that like T Higgins, Cortland Sutton range, where I don't know if he's going to be like an alpha, like locked in alpha, like the way that I felt about Drake London coming out, but he's really, really solid. I mean, this is why I have him at wide receiver 1 right now. There are some, with the breakout score, there are some red flags when you use like, I like to in the prospect guide, and when I look at this stuff, just to make the arguments compelling one way or another, I like to look at both sides, right? And I'll use like just random parameters to sort of filter through to see, oh, what happens when this guy has this kind of breakout score and he's a first round pick, etc. But like he had a breakout score of 83, but for first round picks, that's pretty average over the last decade and a half. Like it's nothing like special. And I know it seems special because he had good production sophomore and junior seasons, but again, you're adjusting and all that kind of stuff. And we just have a lot of good quality wide receivers that are getting drafted in the first round. And so when you look at things and you look at first rounders who have now had an opportunity to play 3 years in the NFL. So this is through 2022, 2021 to 2011 to 2022. 22 of them entered the league with a breakout score below 90. So again, he's at 83. Only one of those players ended up scoring 16 or more PPR points per game in one of his first 3 seasons. Just one of 22. And only 4 of them had 14 or more PPR points, which is usually like a wide receiver 2 season, versus a wide receiver 1 season. And then if you look at the opposite side of that, you're looking at rates of 33% hitting a wide receiver 1 season. That's versus 4.5%. And then 66 points, 2/3 of the over breakout score of 90 hitting 14 PPR points per game or more. So like, yes, there is like somewhat to me of a red flag that like he's just not quite there, which is why I think he's more of like if I'm looking historically at where this kind of wide receiver has been drafted, like I think he's more of a late first, early second type player from like a real NFL draft standpoint. Where
the NFL might agree with you.
They might, at the end of the day, because
he's being mocked to the 20s now.
Right, right. So like that's where I see him as more of the T. Higgins impact as opposed to the Drake London. And I know that London hasn't fully realized that.
Yeah, London might have a T. Higgins impact.
Yeah, right. I just mean, strictly from like a prospect. And I think that anyone would look at London versus Higgins right now. Not only that, but London part of the reason why London's age-adjusted production looks so good is because he was so young when he played college ball and then came out. And there's nothing wrong with like Tet's, age profile. I just think he's somewhere in that like Sutton Higgins range as opposed to the London range.
Yeah, I guess so like he had 44% dominator rating this past year at Arizona, 31% the year before, 25% as a freshman. Now his yards per team pass attempt was 1.61 at that freshman year, so not great. But then above 3 the following 2 years. So it's like, I guess I'm like at Arizona, what would he have had to do? Like is part of the reason that breakout scores low is because he was just at Arizona.
Basically, yeah, but like he also like he could still have done more. Like I know it sounds crazy, but like like Luther Burden had a better max season yards per team pass attempt than Tet did. So like he could have done more. I don't think that like that's why I don't think he's bad. I almost feel bad arguing the con side because I think he's a good prospect. I know that there's like concerns about separation. We've seen separation concerns with other wideouts that are this archetype. I mean, the guys that we're talking, Drake London had the exact same kind of concerns, right?
Yep.
But like I don't I do think that he could have done more hypothetically. And the other thing too is that like we're talking about Jacob Cowing as probably his best competition throughout school.
Right.
And so like that's another piece that goes into it. Luther Burden had Theo Weiss or whatever, who's coming out this year as well, who outperformed him last year, which is not great. But so like, I'm not trying to say like, and again, I have McMillan ahead of Burden, so I'm sitting here like arguing Burden ahead of him or what have you.
But I agree that Ted is not like a slam dunk. I was hoping he would be like a slam dunk, kind of. We'd be in super flex drafts, like, okay, the first quarterback's off. Let's think about Ted kind of thing. He's not that. But I think he's still pretty good. But one thing I would say, the thing that concerns me about Ted is that like he gets comped to. You have T. Higgins, Cortland Sutton, Mike Williams in your draft guide, and I also hear Mike Evans. And I talked about Luther Burden's red flag as far as getting downfield and getting open. Tet has a similar red flag where he's dealing with a high contested target rate on his deep targets.
Yeah,
and
which makes sense.
Yeah, and that's not great
if
you're supposed to be like Mike Evans, not being able to separate deep, and like not being like a bully either. He's pretty skinny, like especially if you're comparing him to Evans,
Yeah.
But yeah, he had 38% of his deep targets contested. 25% of all of his targets were contested, which is a pretty high rate. So like Drake London, but not as much of a dog, or like Mike Evans, but like not good at contesting catches. seems not so great. So I'm still pretty optimistic on him, but I also do see it as more of a boom bust type of bet than I was hoping it would be.
Look, he's a 96.1 in the ZAP model right now. That was with pretty healthy capital, to be fair. That was like top 10 capital. That makes him, though, if you want to think about like how the model is viewing him, not from a player comp standpoint, but this is along the lines of like how Rome Odunze was looked at last year coming out by the model, where I know Odunze didn't pan out the way that people wanted him to pan out, but like just from like he's a I
think that's a pretty good comp in a way, yeah.
In a way, like, yeah. But like I don't like I know many did. I'm just saying like the model clearly had a separation last year with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors is actually the wide receiver one in the model, but like the two, it was a clear separation.
But we had to IKB to Harrison, you know.
It was a clear separation from those two guys to Odunze. And just think about this class as just not having those guys, because those guys are not that caliber of prospect is not in this class of wide receiver.
Well, what about Travis Hunter? He's I know he doesn't score as well as these guys in the ZAP model, but he's close. And what is the model weight being an elite cornerback? How much does he get?
Dude, I don't know about you. Have you found it kind of strange that, and I'm only speaking out loud and thinking out loud here because I think it's good for people to hear this and this side and not just general groupthink about Travis Hunter. Because if you go to social media right now, everyone's sharing Harmon's reception perception chart of all the green from Travis Hunter, which Harmon is arguably the best in the business at doing this. So I'm absolutely he's a good friend of mine, no shade at all. But you get Harmon doing that, and then obviously people will piggyback off of it. I get another good friend of mine, Sigmund Bloom, being like, he's got to be wide receiver one in this class, even from a rookie draft standpoint. And so like people are talking about Travis Hunter the same way that they talked about Marvin Harrison Jr. last year, right? And the analytics just don't back that, right? They don't, like his breakout score is like 66, something like 66.9. That's a 15th percentile breakout score among first round wide receivers since 2011. And my thing is like, all the stuff with Travis Hunter does not look nearly as good. Like even his yards per route run rates are not good, like compared to other first rounders, over the last handful of years. And you just go and you are picking out all these like analytical marks, and they all just look average to above average, but not elite. And you're being the story that he's elite. Now, my thing, and the way that I'm sort of like working through this, I've been working through this for like 2 months now, is I'm seeing it as Hunter did not obviously play a normal wide receiver game. Right. He wasn't in the rooms with like his prep for, he's playing 90 snaps a game. So like, I think that there's a situation here where he very easily could be, have the tools and be seeing something. People are seeing what they're seeing on film and charting what they're seeing, with him not necessarily matching the production with that, because, they're not going to use him in certain ways because they're not on the same page, whatever the reason may be. But like, I am, he's got a score of 95 in the ZAP model. He's still an elite producer in that category, but that's all based on draft capital. Like if I looked at his analytical profile, okay, and I didn't have any context for any of this, and I said, Travis Hunter is just another wide receiver, I'd have just as many, not just as many, almost as many red flags with his first round profile as I would with like a Matthew Golden. Like almost, not
almost.
Yeah,
almost. He said almost.
I probably shouldn't have said Golden as the comp there, because there's.
I thought you were gonna say Burden.
Yeah, but, Burden analytically, like, I mean, I guess if you look at the usage and stuff like that, it's obviously a very, very different situation. The bottom line is, I think that if we didn't have context, and the context is ungodly important here, obviously, but if we didn't have that context, there would be red flags that we would be shouting out about Travis Hunter.
No, I agree. I definitely agree. I mean, his profile, he's, a 3-year early declare guy, 35% dominator rating in the final season, 2.62 yards per team attempts. That's pretty good. You're into that. It's not like, oh my God.
It's not like blow your socks off like the way that people are talking about him.
Right. I do for me with Hunter, there's, especially like in recent years, I am just kind of like, I like guys who are going to have good draft capital and get open at will in the intermediate, even short to intermediate area, right? Like the Ladd McConkey thing of like, last year, I was once he tested the combine and was like a freak athlete, I was like, I'm not fighting this. This is going to happen. This is going to work. He's got a bunch of red flags in the profile, but he had the yards per route run spike. So you got like there's upside, and the way that he will hit is like so good for the game we play.
Yeah, he had rushing production too. Lad, like Lad had everything. Like he had more than just he had like the rushing and all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
Hunter is like kind of similar the way I'm thinking about it. It's like he's just the way he will hit is kind of Garrett Wilson-y, just draw a million targets. And like he did that by them signaling in the plays, like because he had prepped all week at cornerback.
Right.
Like that seems good. From the reason we care about these guys producing at a young age is because they're just like way ahead of the curve.
Yep.
And how could you be more ahead of the curve than putting up an awesome season at wide receiver when your real job is cornerback?
I agree. And that's why I'm not fighting this at all. Like this is one of the cases where I do think that there's plenty of stuff that like the model is never going to say, oh, you played both ways. There,
you played two ways, two-way boost on.
Yeah. Right. Like, I actually think, and I said this before on shows, but like, I think that Travis Hunter and the way that you like draft him in rookie drafts has literally almost nothing to do with talent evaluation. I think it has everything to do with situation evaluation.
He's a landing spot dependent player.
Yeah. Like it actually like at the end of the day, like if I'm even like, I remember when I first published my rankings for the prospect guide, and I was actually at the time, I think it's risen a little bit because more and more people are like growing this love for Travis Hunter to play wide receiver. But at that time, when I published it, like I did all my rankings, and after they're done, I look at what like Keep Trade Cut is saying, just out of curiosity. He was like an early second round Superflex pick. I had him at the end of the first round in Superflex from a rookie draft perspective. And that was after, me saying what I said about his analytical profile not being that strong. So like, I recognize that he's probably an uber talent for a lot of reasons. But I also think it doesn't really matter. What matters is like what your risk tolerance is going to be at like maybe getting a guy who isn't playing that much on offense. I personally think that whoever gets him, generally speaking, there's some teams out there who will probably be like, no, he's just going to be a cornerback or whatever. But generally speaking, I think that we're going to have a situation where he plays a lot on both sides, maybe leans more corner. And when he's not playing on offense, it's going to be in situations where we don't even care if he's playing on offense or not, obvious run situations and stuff like that, where there's going to be these like high leverage red zone situations. And like, what people need to realize too, is that like we care about routes run at wide receiver, not snap rate so much. Right. And so like, if he could still get a 70% route participation rate while still playing, 40% of the team snaps,
He could also have an insane targets per route run.
Exactly. Right. And he will. Like, I guarantee you he will.
Yeah, he will. He really, really will. And yeah, I think, the draft is shaping up that in a way that kind of favors him playing receiver more than I was thinking it would. It seems like, if you look at the betting lines and stuff, Abdul Carter is the favorite to go number 2. And then I think Shador is second after that. I could be wrong. But the Browns are expected to take Carter, not Hunter. And then Hunter probably goes to the Giants at 3. Right. But if not, he goes to the Patriots, where he's like definitely a wide receiver.
Exactly. Right.
Or like if they just decide they need a tackle or something, he'd go to the Jags. I think he's a receiver there. So
I think there's a legit possibility that if he goes to New England, that I would just have him thrown in that top tier at wide receiver from a rookie draft perspective.
I think so too.
Yeah.
But I think he ends up on the Giants, and then you have to talk yourself into Jameis Winston playing at the end of the season and him winning your leagues that way, which I'm actually pretty in on. But yeah, Russell Wilson's number 2 receiver doesn't seem so fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Hunter he's been a fun one to think through. He's continually rising in best ball drafts, and I think he should. The chances seem better that he'll play receiver than they did before. All right, let's talk Ibuka and Golden. They're kind of like two sides of a coin. Maybe you get like the safe 4-year guy
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's a slot probably. Like, what's the ceiling? And then you get the 3-year guy who like never really produced, but he was he was their go-to guy down the stretch. Don't look at the numbers, but he was their go-to guy down the stretch, and like a good route runner. But Harmon wasn't that high. I was expecting that the reception perception on him would be better than it was. Not that he hated him or anything, but
Yeah.
I was excited to see, and it wasn't like, oh man, this guy's getting open nonstop. Um, and and yet Golden seems like he's live to be drafted as the first wide receiver outside of Travis Hunter in this draft class, maybe ultimately flipping Tet, and if not, maybe going like right next to him. So the NFL really likes Golden and seems to be maybe cooling slightly on Ibuka, but what are your thoughts on those two?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it with like the floor and the safety. And we've talked about this before. I think we talked about it last year. You made a really good point where like with prospecting, we often don't give enough love to the safety aspect of things because we really misunderstand the ceiling of those players, right? Like Ibuka, if he has a floor, he probably has a ceiling too. You know, like even if he's mostly a slot guy, like he comped really well to Robert Woods. He comped a little bit to Chris Godwin too. Nelson Aguilar was his third one, but like I liked Igbuka's profile a good bit whenever I did the write up and looked at his metrics. Because again, this is I think this year more than any, I noticed throughout like the market and the way that people were analyzing these prospects, there wasn't enough emphasis put on program adjustments, which I've always done that. I didn't do it. I changed it this year to do it more mathematically with College Football Reference strength of schedule stuff. Before there was sort of like a blanket collegiate program adjustment that was going on. But when you look at Igbuka, like, even the year, where like even during down years, his yards per team pass attempt was a lot better because he was playing at Ohio State. Then he has a teammate score, right? Because he played with all these great wide receivers at Ohio State. And he saw special teams work. Like he's playing beyond just this like slot role for them. I think that there's a better chance that he is a slot receiver at the NFL level than like JSN had coming out. But I think there's still the possibility that we do get, like Robert Woods was able to line up everywhere, but he, and Chris Godwin's, like everyone makes a big deal about like Godwin last year and him playing more in the slot again, but like he still had really good yards per route run rates outside of the slot throughout his career. So like, I'm not like, I think that that's still very possible for Igbuka. And then, with Golden, I think that the red flags are pretty obvious. Like even the story that we're telling ourselves here, where he goes from being like, if you look at NFL mock draft database in like November, he was like a 5th round pick, Matthew Golden. And now he's rising because of the end of the season stuff. He's rising because of the combine. And I have to like objectively ask myself, like, when was the last time a 40 elevating a wide receiver was a good thing? And the answer is like, there's actually an inverse relationship when you adjust for draft capital on day 1 and day 2 between speed of wide receiver and production at the NFL level. So like, I'm not
they overvalue. It's important, but it gets overvalued by
right. Like it's important from a draft capital perspective. Like Matthew Golden not running a 4.29 40 or whatever it was, like he would not be going in round 1 had he run a 4.4. I would almost guarantee.
Could there be a more red flag 40 from this perspective than a 4.29? If he runs a 4.32, is he go like 10 picks later in the draft?
I don't know.
Just to get under that 4.3,
I think I do think it matters. Like it has to matter psychologically to some degree.
It does. It definitely does. You're not used to seeing the 2. It looks great.
You're just not. You're like, man, that's wild. But like, I will say this favorably about Golden. Number 1, my prospect, the Zap model is not looking at yards per route run. And so his top comp was Ladd McConkey in the model. Okay. So that's a good thing, right?
That's a good thing. Yeah.
Number 2, it is adjusting for strength of schedule. Like I said, his best season in yards per team pass attempt was 1.82 raw, but adjusted it was 2.28. So it did rise a decent bit from, with that adjustment. Now,
young and at Texas.
If you go by the raw number, only so I started his profile out with this in the Zap in the prospect guide, but there's been nearly 60 wide receivers that hit 14 or more PPR points per game in one of their first three seasons in the league in the Zap model. only 5 of them did it with a best season receiving yards per team pass attempt below 2. One of them's Tyreek Hill, who is the outlier of all outliers. One of them was Hunter Renfrow, who disappeared after his one good season. There and then
he's
the other
working out for the Raiders. JJ, come on.
Yeah, hopefully, I would love to see Renfrow back.
Me too.
Terry McLaurin was another one who, was just a general like weird production profile.
I thought you said fast guys were bad. Tyreek Hill and Terry McLaurin.
There you go. Pretty good. Nico Collins was one, and then Ladd McConkey. But Collins actually had a good breakout score in the model. It was like 78. Whereas Golden's is not nearly that high. And then McConkey had the yards per route run thing, right? So like, you can explain away all of those players, maybe aside from McLaurin. And McLaurin actually had a really good target QB rating when targeted, for what it's worth. But like, I don't think that I highly doubt that I'm going to be high on Golden post draft. But I think this is one of those cases where the fantasy industry is not going to be, at least from like a dynasty perspective. Maybe best ball will be a little bit different, but like, I don't think that the dynasty space is going to be massively high on Golden because most people analyze via numbers and they look at the analytics and they say, this has never happened before, therefore he's an automatic fade. And I think that this is where the ZAP model can be really helpful because it grounds you with draft capital. It grounds you with like what expectation kind of should be. And so, yeah, he's worse than Egbuka right now in the model, but he still looks fine. Like to me, he's the easy top 5 wide receiver in this class, partially because the class is so bad. I can't imagine taking another wide receiver post draft that gets drafted in like middle round 2, late round 2 within this draft class. Maybe Burden aside, maybe, but like if he falls, but in this draft class, because we know what we're dealing with in this draft class. Ahead of Golden if he goes like 12th to Dallas,
Sure. Yeah, no, 100%. And also I kind of slandered him a little bit. He did have 8 for 162 against Georgia, and then 7 for 149 and 1 against Arizona State. Those were 2 of his final 3 games of this season. So, he did actually step up down the stretch. Now it's 2 games, and he didn't really do much before that. But it's a weird profile where he was at Houston and then transfers to Texas, and they had Isaiah Bond come in as well. Yeah. And we made excuses for Xavier Worthy last year with Quinn Ewers, and so maybe we make excuses for Golden a little bit there too. To me, it's like first round pick, early declare. Not as productive as we liked, but it's like not like nothing. And so there's like a floor. You scoop that guy in the second round of rookie drafts if he's there.
I highly doubt that he is, and like I've seen people throw out like the Henry Ruggs comparison here with Golden. I don't think they're the same players at all. Just in terms of like Golden is like this like separator, route runner and such. But like, I actually have
they're very different.
Yeah, I have Isaiah Bond. One of his comps was actually Henry Ruggs in the Zap.
He's like a littler Henry Ruggs.
Right. But I think, but the other thing too that we like Ruggs, aside from what happened, like we don't know where his career would have gone, but it was at least like starting to trend in an okay direction, not the best direction, but like I do think that that's probably a floor for
real receiver.
Yeah.
By the way, Egbuka you've got him in the guide 6'1", 202. Any guesses on what Justin Jefferson weighed in at the combine?
Oh God, he was sub 2? He was sub 200, wasn't he? Was he like 195?
I've got him 6'1", 202.
Oh, was he 6'1"? I should have just guessed that. So, another slot guy though, right?
Another slot guy. I think Egbuka gets knocked on the ceiling. When I'm in best ball drafts and he's there, I'm just like, you're pretty comfy wide receiver 4 or 5 actually. Like this is not as dangerous as it should be with a pre-draft rookie. So you mentioned that's kind of like after Golden, it's sort of locked in. I agree, but one dude who's been rising up a ton is Jaden Higgins.
Mm-hmm.
And he could ultimately end up going like 12 to Dallas for Golden, sure, but like what if he's, I don't know, in the 20s to the Ravens, and then you get like Jaden Higgins in, the early Jaden Higgins to the Patriots in the early second round. you know, it's gonna be tough not to move up Higgins substantially, and he is someone that I'm intrigued by, even though the profile is not perfect. And the NFL does seem, now maybe it's just gonna be like this weird little blip in the end of March, early April that Higgins had his steam, but it seems like he's the next guy after that group, and could potentially go pretty early second round. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I don't know if you saw this week that Harmon dropped the Higgins
Oh, I
profile.
didn't see that.
It is all red. The whole thing is red.
Ooh,
And
okay.
I went on my show last week saying that so one of the guys in the prospect guide that I talked up a lot was Jalen Knoll out of Iowa State also, right?
Yep. Yep.
I like Knoll versus where his projected capital is more than Higgins versus where his is, but I like both of them a decent bit. Higgins, to me, if you want to look at ceiling, probably outside of the guys we've talked about, has the biggest ceiling in the class, I would argue, because he lined up everywhere at Iowa State. If he still had like a 23-24% slot rate throughout college, which is pretty similar to like a Tet. A lot of his targets were sort of in that short and intermediate area. They used Jalen Knoll actually last year a decent bit, going deep more than he was, because like Jalen Knoll had 1 year where his ADOT was like 2.7, and then last year they developed him a little bit more, had him and used him a little bit more down the field. But Higgins, to me, like, and you watch him, I think he just kind of moves a little bit differently. Like, one of the thing that Harmon said, I'm going to have Harmon on my show to talk about this because I'm curious about his thoughts. But like, he said that Higgins looks like he would be great in a power slot role. But and then he comped it to like Keon Coleman last year, which Harmon nailed with Keon Coleman.
Yeah, he did. He really did.
The idea that he should not be playing the perimeter, and then you look at what the Bills did, and they obviously are not going to be changing that because they just signed Khalil.
No, they're changing it more towards the bad thing. They're like, we don't need Matt Collins because we got Keon Coleman.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. So like Higgins, I like if that's the case, the only thing, this is what I really want to ask him about, but the Higgins tested really well. Like he was fat,
yeah, he did.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's where I wonder if there's a little bit more juice there on the perimeter for him to win with a little bit more speed than Keon Coleman could and can. But yeah, I mean,
if he lined up out wide mostly, and a lot of his production was short and intermediate. So he's
right.
He's going to get drafted to be a kind of X possession receiver.
100%.
And I see that in the numbers. Obviously, if he's not getting open, that's going to be a problem. But yeah, I mean, I think if he's not best used as an X, then this is the wrong draft class for him to be in, because there's not many X receivers, not many true X. Like it's like Tet, and then like him is kind of the next guy, because Trey Harris seems to have fallen off a bit. In terms of the draft capital expectations. So yeah, don't love to hear that he's, the route running might be an issue, but the other guy that originally I was thinking was kind of in the mix as one of these big X's was Alec Iomanor. And he seems now to be on like the day 2 bubble, maybe even a day 3 guy. I kind of was into him for the draft capital to an extent, but he's a 3-year guy, breakout in his second season after he redshirts, pretty productive. He actually comes out ahead of Higgins in your prospect guide. Any thoughts on him?
Yeah, a lot of that is just draft capital related.
Yeah.
Like I think in the guide, that number, that 82.7 score that he has, was based on 52nd overall capital. So that's obviously a pretty strong spot if he were to go there. He's fine. Like to me, he's and his top comp was Torrey Smith, which isn't a bad comp. Whenever I for some reason, Torrey Smith is always the one where people are like, ugh. It's like Torrey Smith had a good.
He was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's also like Leonard Hankerson, like these guys who stretch the field vertically, which is what I think Iomanor will do. I mean, he's got speed, he's got size, he can do that for sure. And it was really weird. Like he's a Canadian born player. He moved to the United States in high school, and he kind of like shifted around high schools. He eventually finds himself at Stanford, doesn't play, as you said, he redshirted that freshman year. He only played 2 years in college. Like that's all we have from him. And so I think that's a little bit intriguing. I do think that he's probably prototypical X, but I think that his role is like where we said Jaden Higgins is more that possession guy. higher volume player. I think Iamaner is more of the field stretcher, not necessarily going to more flanker than someone who's going to just command
like a
a high
Gabe
number of
Davis.
yards. Yeah, like a Gabe Davis type. Yeah.
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 Yeah. I've drafted a fair amount of him because he's so cheap, and like I I keep like lowering his draft capital, and it's like yeah, you still take him though. Because he was a productive early declare guy, and he's if he's drafted in the late third, I could see him being like a Cedric Tillman type of dude too,
Mhm.
which isn't. I mean, he completely did nothing as a rookie, but has shown some intriguing traits. Isaiah Bond, you mentioned, he's the dude that like I'm IK being off of Isaiah Bond. I don't care what the numbers say.
That you what? You don't you're off.
I can't do it. I can't do Isaiah Bond. It's just like we know how this is gonna like. Isn't he Mecole Hardman? Am I wrong?
So here's the thing with Bond. Hardman is actually one of his comps in the model, which is funny. The one thing I'll say about Bond is that his marks within the Zap model look better than Matthew Golden's, because his sophomore year was better. Like his sophomore year, when you look at his stat line, it's like 48 catch, 668 yard, 4 touchdowns, but he did it at Alabama. So so it's a lower passing offense system, and it's a big program, right? Tough strength of schedule. He has a breakout score of 77.7, and then he also had some rushing production. So like he had the things that the production metrics that the Zap model generally is looking for. But yeah, I mean, like exactly like Golden, there's just a lot of question marks. And you also have to wonder, like I had Thor on, like I said, on my show last week or 2 weeks ago. And one of the things that he mentioned was sort of, because he's so good at like putting the narrative and the story around all of these guys, because he's a college football guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the story that he put together was Texas gets these 2 transfers, and they thought Bond was going to be like the Xavier Worthy replacement, like the dude for them. And they go through half the season, more than half the season. They realize that that's not going to be the case. And so they start to switch their attention more to Matthew Golden. And that's why we saw Golden have the great second half season that he had. Now, I would say that's pretty poor coaching to not have that realization until, 8 or 9 games in. But I do understand the narrative and the idea behind it. Bond also apparently has Bond and Luther Burden, but definitely Bond apparently has some off the field concerns. And Steve P mentioned on him and Sam Monson mentioned that Isaiah Bond had Jermaine Burton level off the field stuff.
No.
So because of that, it might be a subjective fade for me too, even though the model's actually going to like Isaiah Bond quite a bit. But I think he's probably more.
He checks some boxes.
He does.
He checks some boxes, but it's like I'm unchecking them manually.
Yeah.
So,
I feel you.
But I have taken him. He's now started to fall like pretty far in best ball. And I am willing to bet on. Like I was listening to Todd McShay talk about where he thinks the guys are going to go, and he's like, Bond's going to go probably second round. I'm like, good God! Like if he's a second round pick, you have to take him for free, So I am trying to mix him in. I'm trying to not IKB it too hard.
He's a bad yards per out run guy, unfortunately, which is not what you like to see either from a big play threat. Like we have like Dante Thornton as like a dart throw in the class, where like his yards per out run is wild, but it's because he's a big play receiver. But with Bond, and I have this in the guide too, but he had a best season yards per out run rate of 2.02. That's a bottom 10 number in the class. And his since 2017, among all first and second round wide receivers, there's only been 2 wideouts that had yards per out run rates that low. It was Adonai Mitchell and Van Jefferson. So, Bond had a better breakout score than those guys because, like I said, his sophomore year was pretty good at Alabama, like all things considered. But it is pretty scary.
I like that. We got to do the David Montgomery combo chart for Bond. The route yards per route run of Van Jefferson, the off field issues of Jermaine Burton,
Top Henry Ruggs and Mecole Hardman. Yeah, it's great.
Good God. Trey Harris. You talked a little about Jalen Noel, Jack Besh, some of these other deeper guys. Like these are the dudes. I mean, Harris probably should be kind of a last round dart throw on best ball, and he's going ahead of that. But these are the guys that we're kind of looking at as like some Jalen Royals, another kind of sleeper guy. Any of these dudes jump out to you at all?
I think, look, I don't think I'm going to be higher than the market on Harris just because there's some serious truthers out there with him because of that, like his final couple seasons, especially last year. Like you could argue that last year's Trey Harris season was the second best individual wide receiver season analytically of any of the guys in this class. And I would only put Luther Burden's sophomore season over it from like a production standpoint. Just like yards per out run was out of control. Yards per team pass
5.12.
Which is just unheard of especially at a Power 5 school. It's just like unheard of. Yeah. So I like Trey Harris fine. I just think there's, he's older. That's a big red flag for me. Later.
I'm not sure where he gets drafted. Like,
right.
He's probably third round now.
To me, Harris is fine, and I don't fine is gonna get me to be on him enough in like rookie drafts and stuff. Just because there's so many people that are in on him. Jalen Knoll is someone I'm really intrigued by. Like, I think Knoll is, I want to see where the draft capital is, but I think you could argue him like the next wide receiver after, maybe there's a hot take after a Golden in rookie drafts. Like,
I don't think it's that much of a hot take. I mean, he could be drafted as the next guy after Golden.
Like he has like above average marks everywhere, right? Which is, and he's doing that on a team with Jaden Higgins, another prospect, another probably day 2 pro. And he did like every year of his was just way different than the other. Like there were some years, like I said, he had that 2.7 ADOT the one year. He played a lot out of the slot, sure. And so, it was never below like a 66% rate in any of his collegiate seasons. So I think he'll get his first crack there. Some people have viewed him as a little bit gimmicky. But I don't think that he's just, he tested as a crazy athlete. He played special teams. He had rushing production. He had everything that you want out of like a well-rounded receiver. And so, on one end of the spectrum, he's like a Devin Duvernay type because that's a similar situation as like a Duvernay. But on the other, it's like Randall Cobb to me. So I'm willing to go for the ceiling, in these situations where I don't think that the capital that you have to spend in any format is going to be very high and great. I think of all these guys that are going to go round 2, he's like the best value, if you will. Round 2 after round 3.
Thank you for not mentioning Sky Moore, who was his middle comp.
I didn't want to bring that up.
He's someone who had really low contested target numbers overall and on deep targets. So I'm not sure if Harmon's done him yet, but it looks like maybe a separator.
I'm hoping. And I don't think Harmon's done test or charted him yet because I yelled at him yesterday about not.
Okay, good. Yeah, please keep yelling at him. Yeah. We need that one. By the way, just to be clear, when I said he could get drafted after Golden, I mean the group that includes Golden, not that he's going to go like 13th overall. Yeah. All right, let's move to running back. Ashton Jeanty is a very good prospect. Where would you put him kind of among the best running back prospects that we've seen?
Yeah, I mean, look, I go back to 2011 with this stuff. Right now, he has a score of 99.2, which honestly is probably going to rise a little bit based on
he goes 6th overall.
If he goes 6th overall to Vegas, the only guys that have been above the 99 mark in the model have been Todd Gurley, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, and Jahmyr Gibbs. And so, I mean, to me, Jeanty's a lock. Like he's the 101 in rookie drafts. He is I think he's in a tier of his own in this running back class, this elite running back class. People question the receiving profile a little bit, but the way that I look at this stuff and look at running backs, it's a look at all seasons together, and not just one singular season. And if you look at what he did 2 years ago as a receiver, he has one of the best reception shares in the database, not just the class. Like he had like a wild, like 23% something reception share, I think it was. But the hardest thing for me is who does he comp to? Because there aren't many players that have come out that, have been his size and had his draft capital and whatnot. So like, everyone's been going back to like LaDainian Tomlinson and Maurice Jones-Drew comps. And there's a reason for that. It's because he's like that unique, right? Because you have to go all the way back to 2002 or whatever to find a comp for him. I think he's easily the best running back in this class.
He had 3.19 yards per route run in 2023, which is awesome. And then, I mean, for running back, like That's just crazy. We should talk about Matthew Golden not getting above like 2.5, and running back who at 3.19. He was at 0.54 this past year, which is maybe concerning, but they gave him an absurd amount of work. Like I just think you're kind of capped out in terms of what you're going to ask Ashton Genty to do when you're feeding him as a rusher as much as they gave him 374 carries.
Yeah.
So like, okay, you didn't use him in the receiving game after he already proved he could be an elite receiver. I'm just not worried about it. I really am not. And you look at what is his profile? Like, well, he breaks tackles nonstop and is like extremely elusive and shifty. I wonder if that'll work in the receiving game.
Right. Right. I don't want to overthink it with him.
Yeah, I'm not. I refuse to overthink it. I think he's the locked in Superflex 101. Like, you don't need the quarterback that bad. Right. Don't take Cam Ward. Take this dude. I think that very quickly he'll end up being the dynasty running back 1 overall, because you can just turn in like a really strong season, not an elite season, but like a really productive season, and it'll be like, oh wow, like I'm gonna have this guy. It's just like resetting the clock at running back is so important, and you're resetting the Bijan clock like 2 years if you flip to Genty. So yeah, pretty easy one. Hampton is, you're getting the buzz on him now. He's rising, and you're hearing like, oh, some teams have him over Genty. I'm like, maybe can you tell me which teams? Because I want to downweight their analysis going forward. I don't think Hampton's really in Genty's tier at all, but we're talking about a guy who could easily go top 15, top 20. Top 20 now seems like maybe the most likely outcome for him. And so I've actually been viewing him as probably a bigger target at cost in best ball drafts than Genty, who I'm happy to take at 12, but I don't necessarily want to like reach for over the wide receivers ahead of that. So Hampton, you can get at the 3-4 turn, or even in the 4th, or you can get him in the 5th sometimes still in DraftKings. Just hammering him. I think the draft capital is just extremely underpriced at that price.
Yeah, I mean, we've had 18 first-round running backs since 2011. Of those 18, only Mark Ingram, David Wilson, Rashad Penny, Sony Michel, Josh Jacobs, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire failed to reach 16 PPR points per game in one of their first 3 seasons. So that's like that sounds like there's a lot of them, but that's literally telling you there's a 2/3 chance that you'll get an RB1 season or over their first 3 years of their career from just being a first-round running back. Then you layer on the fact that Mark Ingram and Josh Jacobs eventually got there, right?
Right.
Rashad Penny couldn't stay healthy. And David Wilson had to retire. Like the hit rate is unbelievable from first round running backs. And then I looked also, if you give him 20th overall capital, that's Denver, I think, right? In the draft. If you give him 20th overall capital, he'll have a score over 98. If you look at the 13 running backs in the model's history that have scored a 97 or better, of those players, only one of them was unable to get to 14 or more PPR points per game in one of their first 3 years. So to me, odds are very, very much in Amari and Hampton's favor as long as we get that first round capital. Now, if he slips, if he's more of a round 2 guy, you start to get a little bit, some more question marks or a little bit more question marks. But to me, he comps really well to Zeke and Todd Gurley. He has that kind of profile. I know that people are I've seen takes that he's not even deserving to be a round 2 guy. Some people really don't like him. I actually saw that this week, but I just don't think that an NFL team is going to see this size speed combination who can be maybe not like a massive plus in the receiving game, but be able to handle enough work as a receiver.
Jacobs kind of, he can do it.
I mean,
all.
I think even a Zeke, Zeke was
Zeke,
or Gurley. Gurley's probably a better example. I think Zeke was probably a little bit better of a receiver, but he could still be a 13 to 15% target share player if he is a bell cow in his offense, So I'm super high on him. I think that he's in a tier of his own after
I agree
his tier.
Yeah, I agree. To me, he's kind of in that early to mid first of a super flex draft, whereas Genty is the clear cut 101. Don't overthink it type of tier.
I think Hampton, you could argue if he gets 20th overall capital, I think even in Superflex, you could at least argue like the same tier as Cam Ward.
Sure.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
like
No, I don't think
102,
that's
103 flip-flop, whatever you need kind of deal.
you could take him over Cam Ward.
Right.
To me, you get in the Broncos starting running, but they got one of the best offensive lines in the league.
Right.
They got the quarterback situation figured out. You got Sean Payton. They're going to throw to him. They didn't throw to them last year, but the fact that they're like desperately looking to replace all their running backs, maybe it's related. I don't know. After him, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins are kind of forming a tier in sort of expected draft capital. You have Caleb Johnson in the mix here. That's how I had it ranked originally, but I'm like a little bit worried about Johnson's draft capital. Maybe he's a 3rd round pick.
Yep.
Probably not. He's probably in the 2nd round, but I think you could be looking at him more like the mid to late 2nd, and Judkins early 2nd, taking one of those jobs that, Genty doesn't get. Say Genty goes 6. We could be looking at Judkins to the Bears or something in round 2.
Yeah,
so you get excited about that. Henderson, I think, is still live to go round 1. Pretty big dog, but I think it could happen. Thoughts on kind of that group, and do you share my concerns that Johnson's slipping a little?
I do. It's one of those things where like I've seen the take, and I don't disagree with the take that like his combine was fine because his speed score was fine. Like it's not, but the problem is every other running back in the class had like a great 40 time.
Yeah.
So just by
it wasn't a great year to turn in a B+ paper.
Yeah. Like, right. Like just by association, he got dinged a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, like I think Henderson is the most intriguing of the 3 personally, because I value pass catching a lot at the position. We know that it's ungodly important from a fantasy perspective. And, we sort of tease it at the beginning, but the running back model no longer uses rushing metrics at all. So the inputs that it's using, there's draft capital, there's size, there's teammate score. And then there's breakout score, which is actually now the exact same thing as the wide receiver model, where I'm using receiving yards per team pass attempt adjusted for both age and program strength. And then there's best season reception share. So and that's not adjusted for anything. It's just best season reception share. And that's prorated. They had to hit, I think, 6 games played to be able to qualify for it. But, and it's because like I mentioned that, and they're like, oh, your model must hate Quinshon Judkins then. And I mean, like it doesn't hate him, but there are red flags to that profile. Like Quinshon Judkins, he had a below average breakout score. It's like 46.5, which isn't that strong for a 1st or 2nd round pick. And it doesn't mean that I think that he's incapable of being a receiver in the NFL or receiving threat in the NFL. It's just that if you look at players who have this kind of receiving profile in college, a breakout score that low, best season reception share. So I looked at breakout scores below 60. He was at 46.5, and best season reception share is under 10%. He was under 9%. There's been 22 running backs that had top 100 draft capital that hit those marks in the ZAP model, and only 2 of them had a target share per game rate, best season target share per game rate in their first 3 years in the NFL, above 10%. And it was Doug Martin actually above 9%. And it was Doug Martin and Jerick McKinnon, who McKinnon wasn't even a normal prospect, right?
Right.
So like
quarterback.
You're talking like a very real chance. And like it doesn't mean that I don't think he can be an 8-9% type target share player. It just means that we're looking more at like a Jonathan Taylor usage from a usage perspective
totally.
as a ceiling. And you might say, well, Jonathan Taylor is a freak athlete who has hit that ceiling at the NFL level, whereas we can't just guarantee that with Quinshon Judkins, especially when you're comparing him to someone like Travion Henderson, who has a really good age-adjusted receiving profile because of what he did as a freshman amongst literal like stud wide receivers. Like it's hard for me to, like they're not that far off in the ZAP model, but I think, like just from like a comfortability standpoint, if you're playing in even half, but definitely full PPR leagues, like to me, Travion Henderson is like what we saw from James Cook. Like he could do what James Cook did last year. They actually, the 2 of them comp really, really close to one another. And from a size perspective, breakout score perspective, all that kind of stuff. Like I think that that's what we're looking at with Travion Henderson. Whereas with Quinshon Judkins, maybe we get a Melvin Gordon type player out of him. But I also am worried that this is a Trey Benson situation, right? Where like he's not like, I mean, Trey Benson tested as a really good athlete. Like he had a really good speed score, but his like production profile wasn't unbelievable. And again, a lot of people are going to say, well, Judkins' production profile is pretty unbelievable because of what he did on the ground. But a lot of what these players do on the ground is captured in draft capital itself. It's captured in the size profile itself, like within the model, right? And so, like, if Judkins goes in, like, the bottom line is we care more about receiving at running back than the NFL does.
For sure.
That's what this comes down to.
Yeah. I mean, top comp for Judkins for me is Cam Akers.
Yeah, that works. Yeah.
Yeah, and Akers, I was just pulling him out. Akers has never had 15 receptions in a season. Now he had played 13 games as a rookie. Obviously suffers the Achilles tear. But yeah, he's been a 2-down guy. But at the same time, like Akers got, we were drafting Akers in like the 5th round, I want to say, in drafts in his rookie season.
Yeah.
My feeling on Judkins has been like, if I'm getting him in the 6th or 7th, it's kind of 6th on Underdog, 7th on DraftKings. I'm into it because he's going to get drafted pretty high, and he's probably going to be a clear-cut start. Like Akers, we had to wait for. Akers, I forget who we had to pass, but it took most of the season for him to do anything. I think Judkins could be productive out of the gate. And like, if you're going to give me like a starting running back in the 6th, I will take that. I don't want to take him in like the 4th or the 3rd or something like that. I think to me, pre-draft, I'm going to bet the draft capital more and then like maybe bank some of that exposure and then I don't have to chase so much. Because I agree with you, there's some holes in the profile.
Yeah, look, I like that's the thing. I think that Judkins, especially in like a best ball environment, and I'm not even, like there are certain instances in redraft where it's fine, but like I think that he can be a really solid RB2 in fantasy. I just worry a little bit about the ceiling because we know how important receiving is. So in order for him to hit that ceiling, he's probably going to have to land in an environment that scores a lot of touchdowns. Like it probably needs to be a pretty good scoring offense because if you look historically at guys who were, it's basically Derrick Henry. Like if you look at Derrick Henry's like massive seasons, it's when he's on teams that can score a lot of touchdowns or he just has an unsustainable share of those touchdowns. And also Quinshon Judkins is not Derrick Henry.
He's not Derrick Henry. Yeah. He's a huge man and like 20 pounds shy. So I love the big water bottle. First appearance.
Oh yeah. I got the giant jug that is larger than my head. My head is huge. So like this is,
Henderson, the top comp for me was Devon Achane.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying though. Like that, I think that we like I wrote about this in the guide because in one of the inputs is running back weight for the model, and people are like, well, what about today's game? We're seeing Devon Achane and we're seeing James Cook and Devon Achane and Jahmyr Gibbs had unbelievably good age adjusted and program adjusted receiving profiles. And if you don't have that, and you're like, sure, the model despises Keaton Mitchell, like. Yeah, it missed and it was too low on Bucky Irving last year, right? And it's still but I adjusted things this year not because of Bucky or because of Kyron Williams, but because I wanted to make a better model, right? So some things adjusted, but like now Kyron Williams actually looks like a plus prospect, and Bucky Irving looks a little bit better. There's still red flags to the profile, but I think there were red flags to Bucky's profile just in general too. Like he wasn't a great speed score guy, and
I mean, the RAS is terrible.
Yeah, right.
That's a red flag, even if he overcomes it.
Yeah, right. It's still a thing that was a problem, right? But I think so like don't think that like a small running back means that they can't overcome that and be. Devon Achane had a great production profile and had great draft capital. Again, goes and plays into the idea that draft capital is going to capture a lot of this stuff too. So like, I just think that Travion Henderson. Like we're talking about Quinshon Judkins maybe having more of a realistic 80th to 90th percentile outcome ceiling of an RB2. I think Travion Henderson has like a 30th percentile outcome in PPR as like an RB2. And then maybe the RB1 outcome is like 90th, but I think that the ceiling is just greater because the receiving profile could be really crazy.
What do you think about like in terms of, it depends in Dynasty how like liquid your trade market is and stuff, but some of this is sometimes I think like, well, we can figure this out like later a little bit. Like if I have like ceiling questions with,
Yeah.
especially if a guy hits a landing, like if I'm betting on Judkins, let's say, to be
Mhm.
undervalued relative to what his post draft evaluation could be, I'm still willing to bet on that. And then like in year 2, if he's like going in the 3rd round and we're expecting this, or 2nd round, we're expecting this like
Yeah.
gigantic, like he's now the guy, I can be like, I'm going to go back to the prospect profile and be like, probably not,
Yeah,
actually.
well, but I also think that like I mentioned that the NFL doesn't value receiving as much as we do. I think the fantasy market still doesn't value receiving as much as
Yeah.
it should, you know? So from
Yeah.
that perspective, Quinshon Judkins probably will maintain value and give you like this is the same theory that I did a podcast about this a couple years ago. But when you draft quarterbacks in Superflex, do it because they don't lose value ever. Like Kenny Pickett barely lost value from year 1 to year 2, right? Like the
Yeah.
worst outcome for a starting quarterback. Zach Wilson barely lost any
Yeah.
value.
Good God.
So you have an out after year 1. Now, I do think that all of your outs kind of then hit after year 1, and you got to make
They
a
do.
decision. But that's
I made this point with Richardson last year. It's it's on the site. Check it out. I was saying like you could send like a 2nd and Richardson for Burrow right now.
Yeah,
like that's a
I
thing that
wish I did
exists.
that in more leagues. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I didn't do it, but it
I
was
did
out
one.
there.
I did do one Richardson trade last year. This is I had a decent amount of them because of the retaining value piece, and then you just are in all these dynasty leagues and they're just like not active enough, and you're like, well, I guess I'm just holding the bag here.
Yeah, you need to be in an active league.
Yeah,
some
it's
of
tough.
the FFPC ones are pretty good for activity.
That's where that's where me and this other dude who co-manages with me, we ended up getting rid of Richardson, and it turned into JJ McCarthy and Malik Neighbors for Anthony Richardson. Feels good.
Okay.
Feels
All
real
right.
good. Yeah.
That is very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've talked to Davis about this, like the industry leagues that we're all in, like no one
No one
really
does. Yeah.
trades. Yeah.
You're just holding the bag. That's why you can't do that kind of thing. Like you have to, like even if it means that you're reaching over market, I think you have to do that a little bit in those formats. Like maybe you don't want to get Judkins if you think that
right.
the realistic ceiling is.
I'm not gonna be able to go to JJ next year and be like, hey, time to pay up for Judkins.
Yeah. Exactly.
It doesn't work. Caleb Johnson, I had some concerns about, similar to Judkins, that he's maybe a 2-down guy. His yards per route run was a little bit better than Judkins, but not good. And he ran like no routes, which to me, I'm like, some of the way I view the receiving stuff is like a guy like Breece Hall, comes in, he'd run a bunch of routes. His yards per route run wasn't terrible. It's like, you can probably do it. Depends if the team wants to like feature you in that way. But the guys who have poor efficiency on like low opportunity, generally it's more the Kenneth Walker situation. That's my concern with Johnson. But you have Le'Veon Bell as his top comp. James Conner. I mean, Conner is not like a huge pass catcher, but he can certainly do it. So, are you seeing that a little bit differently than me?
Yeah, so his breakouts, because obviously Iowa is barely throwing the ball. I think they were 6th lowest in all of college football last year in pass attempts. So obviously he's not going to catch a lot of passes. But last year he caught a decent amount in the context of how many passes they threw. I think he had like a 14% reception share, which is pretty solid. Anything above 10% is fine. Anything above 12%, you start to get good. 14, 15%, that's like pretty excellent. So like that's good. His breakout score was 75.8. So like those two inputs are what's leading and kind of shifting towards like the Le'Veon Bell comp. But I kind of look at, I've said this before too, but like I look at receiving at running back as in like 3 buckets, and this is like really dumbing it down, but it's like you're either elite, like Christian McCaffrey, or Jahmyr Gibbs,
Kamara.
whatever, Bijan Robinson, or you're really, really bad, and there's like a clear red flag to your profile. I wouldn't even put Judkins in the really, really bad. I'm not
Me neither.
saying that. But then there's this massive, massive middle tier where it's like, yeah, you're fine. You're probably not gonna be a plus from that perspective. And that just makes it team dependent, which is exactly what we've seen from Kenneth Walker, right? Like my flag with Walker, and it's actually funny, I redid all of the model stuff. His breakout score is like unbelievably good now in the model. Yeah, which I was shocked by. Because I was pretty like outgoing about the fact that and talked about it a lot about how his receiving profile like was not that good, and historically we hadn't seen many great receiving backs, with that kind of profile. And that was the truth for the first couple of years of his career. And then you get a regime change and then things change.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I see with James Conner, with Caleb Johnson, with Quinshon Judkins. It's like you might get a year where they're not used that much at all as receivers, like 6-7% target shares, but maybe a new coaching staff comes in and their system says, we want to use these guys as like 11-12% target share guys. So like, I think Johnson is capable in doing that. I just don't think he's going to be a plus as a receiver.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's sort of like he's maybe a little bit, I'm like a little bit more nervous that he would just be kind of like a straight up 2-down guy, like leave the field on 3rd down. But because to some extent, it's like, I don't care that much that Kyron Williams doesn't catch a bunch of passes because he's like always on the field. It's like, so are you going to be like a 3-down guy or a 2-down committee? Are you going to be AJ Dillon?
I think there's at least more question marks with him than other prospects that sort of looked like him coming out, right? The question marks, I mean, is how is that team going to use him? Not necessarily what is he capable of doing.
Right. No, I agree. Cam Skattebo is one of these guys that we're like used to being a fantasy sleeper. He's a day 3 guy, but man, look at the production. He's the jumps are actually really good. Look at the receiving. It's pretty great. In a couple years, if he can convince a team, maybe we'll have something here, but like the NFL seems kind of into him.
Mm-hmm.
He might go round 2, probably round 3. He might fall to round 4, but I would be pretty like shocked if he fell to like the 5th round or something. I think he's pretty locked into a decent draft day, outlay. So I'm like, I feel like maybe I'm setting myself up to get hurt with a guy who's like not that athletic, 4.65 40, but he's big. He catches passes. He was crazy productive. And he's probably going to go day 2. I'm just drafting him, JJ. I'm in.
Yeah. Look, I'm definitely more in than out, I would say. The one thing I would also, like in the Zap model, I look at speed score at running back. I don't look at any of that stuff at wide receiver for the stuff I talked about earlier, because there's actually like an inverse relationship if you're going to include draft capital. But at running back, speed score does get signal even on top of draft capital. And so, but the speed score is more so kind of like the running back thing I just talked about with receiving, where it's like there's a giant middle ground where like everyone's just kind of neutral with their speed score. And then once you get above a certain mark, like you start to gain a little bit of love or whatever. And then if you're below a certain, I think 92 is the bottom mark that I look at. And it's not like it just tanks somebody, but it can be detrimental to a player's score. So Skattebo, like at prospect guide launch, looked good because I didn't have his 40 time. I had a neutral score for him. He runs a 4.65, but it's actually a 4.7 in the model because I add 0.05
for the pro day.
For the pro day. So now he's technically below the 92 mark. So he's going to lose a little bit, but he's going to still be looked at as neutral now instead of being like a very good pick by whatever team would get him. Right. So, I mean, like, I think that if like, aside from Ashton Genty, he probably has the best production profile in the class, like across the board.
Seems good.
And it's funny you mentioned day 2, day 3. His 3 comps are Kareem Hunt, Zach Moss, Keyshawn Vaughn, which I after I put this together, I remembered Kareem Hunt came out, people liked him, they didn't like him, whatever. He ended up hitting. And then when Zach Moss and Keyshawn Vaughn came out, they were both Kareem Hunt comps. Like that was so it's that same slower kind of, I mean, I don't think Vaughn was as slow, but like, guys who can break tackles and are more bruisers, hypothetical bruisers. Vaughn didn't really see the field, but, who can also at least do something through the air. I do think that there, are some advanced metrics that don't paint the best picture, like his career explosive run rate. It was 12%. And that plays when you get a data point that plays so closely to the narrative, that's definitely a red flag, right? Like it's like, we know the explosive run rates probably aren't there. And if you look at the last 5 years, there have only been 3 running backs taken in the top 120 with explosive run rates below 13%. AJ Dillon, Josh Kelly, and Blake Corum. Those are the only 3. So you want a little bit more explosion than what you're getting from Scatterboo, and that's what turns me off a little bit. I just think it's going to be like more than some of these other guys. He's going to be more landing spot dependent.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons that I'm excited about him is that if he goes early third round, the landing spots could be pretty good.
Yeah.
So, and if he goes basically within the range where you could be installed as like a 1A back out of the gate, even as a 1B, like if he were to go,
like he could be in Pittsburgh.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He could be their third round pick.
Totally.
Yeah.
Chargers, the forming a committee with Najee Harris. Like I'm into that.
That'd be the most Greg Roman high T thing of all time. Yeah.
It would be pretty cool.
That'd be crazy.
But yeah, I mean, he like some of his comps are like Javorius Allen, Devontae Booker, some of these like DeAndre Washington, but big, sort of guys where you're like, Charles Sims wasn't a comp. I don't think he's even in here, but like mentally he's a comp.
Yeah.
Rashad White actually shows up.
Yeah.
None of this is like particularly bullish, but like Rashad White, if he was awesome in short yardage and maybe like a little bit worse of a receiver, that could work. That could work for a couple years. I don't know. I guess part of it for me with Scatterboo is that I'm just like so intrigued that the NFL's in,
it is interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, like, I'm probably at the point where I think he's fringe, like probably more so than not that he'd be a day two guy, but I think that I think it's closer to 50-50 for day two.
Okay.
Yeah.
After Scatterboo, I would say Sampson is better than 50-50 to beat day two, or at least like around 50-50. But then it gets like really, really dicey about who actually gets drafted in the third round versus falling, and potentially like falling pretty far because there's a lot of running backs in this class. There might be a team that like absolutely loves Devin Neal, but drafts Quinshon Judkins and doesn't need a running back now.
Yeah.
And there's so many of these guys that you could just see someone slip. Bashal Tutin is someone that I am pretty excited about. He rates really well in the model here, but like, would I be shocked if he was a 5th round pick? Would I be shocked if Devin Neal was a 5th round pick? What's your read on this next group of guys where draft capital is so uncertain?
Yeah, that's exactly why I said what I said earlier, where you just have, and I would even put Scatterboo to some degree, even in this tier, where it's like, we can't confidently say that they're going to go day two. We can only say,
I put him in the Samson tier.
Samson. Yeah. So, but even still, like, you can't, like, let's say that Scatterboo and Sampson are sort of in their own grouping of like, probably, but maybe not. And then there's a bunch of guys where it's just like, we have no idea. Right. And so that's why right now, pre-draft, is really, really difficult to rank these guys over some of the wide receivers who we feel great about going day two. Right. Because if these guys fall to round 3, we know the hit rates are horrible out of day 3. We know the hit rates are horrible out of day 3. And a lot of the stuff that I care about does, like, there's not a ton. I mean, you get some correlation, but there's much more like the prospect model is really focused in on like top 100 picks at the end of the day, right? Like there's not as much rhyme or reason as to why guys hit out of day 3 at running back versus what we see out of day 1 and day 2. Like day 1 and day 2, it's like, if you have a smaller back who didn't catch passes out of the backfield, or even a big back who didn't catch passes out of the backfield, probably generally avoid that guy, especially if he doesn't have a good speed score. Like that's the general, like, gist for these day 2 guys. But yeah, I mean, like I really like Tutin. I think Bashal Tutin is should go in on day 2. Like I think that he, of all of the guys that we just mentioned, like his comp in the model is Kenneth Walker, and like his top comp is. And I know it sounds wild, but if you look at the Zap model database, there's only been 3 running backs with top 200 draft capital who had a 110 or more speed score, who measured in under 5'10" and 215 pounds. So they were smaller backs with high speed scores who had top 200 draft capitals, not even like top 100. And it was Jerick McKinnon, Kenneth Walker, and Jahmyr Gibbs, and now Bashal Tutin's part of that.
Wow.
So like,
wow.
I think there's a very real chance that Tootin goes day 2, and because people are just so interested in that size speed combination, and he has a pretty decent receiving profile. He just looks solid across the board. Now it could go south. Like one of his comps is Darrington Evans, but this is the kind of player, in my opinion, that you do want to invest in because you at least get the ceiling out of him. And he did have the pass catching. He's got the speed score. He's got interesting size. If you watch him, it's wild how fast he looks on film too. Like he's explosive.
And he was a workhorse. Blair Andrews had the backfield dominator rating out recently, and Tootin's the guy this year. He played on special teams. He had some fumbling issues at Virginia Tech, but he didn't fumble. I forget, was it North Carolina A&T?
Yeah,
maybe
NCA&T. Yeah,
yeah. He didn't fumble there at all, so that might not be a real red flag. And it's the type of thing where I only care about it to the extent that the NFL team doesn't play him or trust him.
Yeah. The only other running back who I think if he goes day 2, I'd probably jump over Tootin if they're both day 2 might be DJ Giddens.
Yeah, man.
Because Giddens, I have this in the prospect guide. It's one of my favorite like filters that I ran for one of the write-ups. But now granted, like the numbers that I'm going to read are basically Giddens numbers. So this is the baseline. So all the players were better than him within these numbers, but it's still really, really interesting. There are only 9 running backs in the models database who had a speed score of at least 110. So he was a little bit above that. A breakout score of at least 75. He was at 77.9, and a best season total yards per team play rate above 2. So he was a decent chunk above 2. Here are the 9 players. You ready? Todd Gurley, Ezekiel Elliott, Joe Mixon, Leonard Fournette, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, Najee Harris, Breece Hall, and Kenneth Walker.
Okay.
Let's get
this guy drafted.
Yeah. Like Giddens was the one when I did my rank, because at least with Tootin, he exited the combine and people are like, oh, I got to pay attention to Bashal Tootin now because he ran such a fast 40. DJ Giddens kind of like slid a little bit under the radar because he had an unbelievable 42 and an unbelievable speed score, but people were so focused on Tootin that they didn't pay him as much attention to Giddens. And I remember doing my rookie rankings and I had Giddens at like RB8 or something like that, like top 10 running back. He was like RB16 or 17 or something on Keep Trade, like something ridiculous on Keep Trade Cut. I think he is the dude that if he slips into round 2 or onto day 2, that he could be like the best running back value in every format.
I love Giddens. We've been high on Giddens in the best ball ranks the whole time, but raised him up even more recently. Michael Dubner has an article coming out where he's kind of predicting where we're going to be drafting these guys after the draft, and he just was like gold star Giddens, absolute smash. And Tootin was a little bit more like risky as far as where he might go after the draft, but he's in. I'm also in. I don't want to be fading Tootin, but Giddens. The thing about him that I identified as a potential red flag, given his draft capital, is that like when you look at Giddens, looking at these peripherals, kind of the rushing, the efficiency in terms of breakaway yards, but also like his yards per route run, it's a lot of like, oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good too.
Yeah,
that's also pretty good.
Yeah.
There's nothing though, like when you compare him to a guy like RJ Harvey, who had a 50% breakaway percentage, which is awesome. Giddens is at 41, which is good. And you have these things with Harvey where you're like, exactly why he's going to get on the field. He's going to be an explosion back who you can use in the passing game. You can have plays designed to get Harvey involved. And I don't worry about like him just being like stuck behind someone. Like he'll have a role where Giddens, everyone you mentioned there, they're all like highly drafted guys who get installed as starters.
100%.
And he should be that guy. Like, I think he deserves that opportunity. But if he doesn't get it, is he just like a Zach Charbonnet, one of these awesome backups who anytime he gets a chance crushes, but, ultimately doesn't do much because he's stuck behind someone else for most of the year?
Look, you very rarely like when I do that filtering, and like I even prefaced that in the guide. I said, let's have some fun with numbers, because I'm using, again, when you use a player's numbers as the baseline, that means that everyone else that you're involving in that query is better than that player, right? You're not giving the con side.
You didn't go down a little to see who was
like
right
that's the
behind.
problem when people filter on like stat head and stuff, and then they send screenshots on Twitter. It's like, well, you got to look at the opposite side of that spectrum too. You can't just look at that one. And so, like, you have to take all of that with a grain of salt. But I will say, when I do those filtering exercises, usually I have to involve draft capital, and I'm not involving draft capital here, which is actually pretty crazy because like I said, or like when I'm looking at day 3 running backs, like a good example of this, someone who looks really good in the model is Rocket Sanders. And he has like, if you want to just like think of prospecting running back in the most elementary, easy to consume way possible, get a big player who's fast and catches passes. That's it. Like, that's what that, like, you will probably find some hits, right? But when you get to day 3, that's when things start to get really shaky with that general guideline where like you can find a lot more busts and like it's not as clean. And then you get like the random Bucky Irvings or Damian Pierces or whoever who have these like, Bucky obviously seems like sustainable, but even like the one-offs, you very rarely will get like the Aaron Joneses where like it's so obvious that he was a good prospect and it was wild that he fell to the 5th round. And he had such a good profile all around and he had the size, speed, he had everything. But he just fell probably because of program size. But like, you very rarely will like just get that player where like Rocket Sanders, I want to really like him and I do like him as a sleeper, but I don't know, just because I don't know how much all of that matters because he's probably going to be a day 3 pick. Same with like Jarquez Hunter. Like I like him a lot as a sleeper, but we have to be realistic about what happens out of day 3 at running back, which is a lot of the stuff that we're looking at gets thrown out the window. Right. So like, that's why I say Giddens, if he does get the capital, he starts to really lean more into that crazy, crazy group of first rounders, basically, and some second rounders. He starts to lean into that a lot more than just being this whatever guy who just didn't get the capital and all of these metrics just don't really matter for him.
Right. It's frustrating because like if he goes round 4 and he ultimately gets that chance, then they'll probably like draft a guy who's basically as good as him in round 2 and replace him. Like,
let me be honest. I'm still going to draft DJ Giddens even if he goes day 3. If I'm being honest with you, like it's like I'm still taking chances. Like you're still going to have better probability getting a day 3 running back who hits on the things that you want them to hit on. Like this is how I was into Isaiah Pacheco when he came out. When the market wasn't really in on it. It's like big, fast. He could generally, he still was in that like middle bucket that I was talking about as a pass catcher. It still works more than, getting some random smaller guy who has no receiving profile. But even so, you just have to recognize that the hit rate's really low.
Yeah, he's 212 and he's an elite athlete and he catches passes and he was good at running the ball. I don't know. I'm in. I mean, he is like a 4th round pick. He comes out as like a 2nd round rookie pick to me. It's like if he's like 5th round, he'd be like a 3rd round rookie pick. I think we should be taking DJ Giddens, even if he's not a day 2 pick. But yeah, I mean, as like if he was like the 50th pick in the draft, I would have him as a late 1st round rookie pick.
Oh my gosh. Don't even. Yeah, I'm too excited.
Let's come on one time. The group behind that, let's see. Devin Neal, he's another guy. I'm like, Neal is sort of Giddensy in that I'm like, man, what if you just loaded this guy up with touches? That seems like it would be really fun and would work. But I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's going to go day 3.
I don't think he has the athletic profile the way that a Giddens does. And I just don't know if it's going to be there for him. That's why like his top comp is Shane Vereen, which I thought was pretty interesting because Vereen was actually bigger than people realized from a size perspective. And, I think that the way that Neal finds the field is if he finds a team and an offense that's going to be willing to use him as a pass catcher at his size, which we don't get that often. Like we don't get teams willing to use that kind of archetype and that size of a player in that kind of role. And so that's what scares me is that I just don't know where he fits exactly. Cause I don't think he has like the he was below average and explosive run rate. I just don't know if he has the juice to be like a consistent producer. He's going to need that receiving work. I don't think that a team is going to like want to use him in that way.
Yeah, he's also like his success rate wasn't that great. He's not that great in elusive rating. pretty decent. Like I look at some of the per game stuff compared to the per touch stuff, which can be interesting. And he's pretty good in the per game stuff because he handled a lot of work and he was very productive. But the per touch stuff or per route stuff, not so great. And so I think he's somewhat draft capital dependent. But I have seen some love for Devin Neal, where like people saying they think he's worth like a second round pick or at least a day 2 pick. So I'm leaving the light on for that, because if he just strikes me as a dude where you're like, Devin Neal's our starter now, like I think that will work.
I don't think he's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but he's someone I've had to cool off on a little.
Almost analytically like a diet Caleb Johnson, maybe
sure
from an analytical perspective. The ability to just kind of do everything for your team. Yes. I just don't know how special that everything is going to be.
That's exactly how I see him. Yeah. RJ Harvey is kind of the flip side, where you're like, I see you having a role, but are you ever going to be more than just like a rotational explosion back? But the thing with Harvey is he's not like that small. He's 205. He's only 5'8", but he's 205.
You are describing, I love how you just described that, because his top comp for me is Chase Brown, which is exactly how people describe Chase Brown, where him coming out, especially, everyone's like, is he like what, like he had the athleticism, Chase Brown did. He had a really good collegiate profile, especially on the ground. Like he actually carried a lot of work. And then for some reason he gets to the league and people are like, well, can he handle a big workload? And it's like, well, he did that in college. Like he was able to do that. And maybe like you think that he's like 190 pounds, but he's actually not. And I feel similarly with RJ Harvey. So it's funny that you brought it up that way.
Harvey's a guy I feel like is a little bit more robust to the draft capital stuff. Like I was saying, I mean, if Harvey was drafted high, I'd be pretty into it. But even if he's like a 4th round pick, he's going to be like a 2nd round rookie pick for me.
Yeah, I like him. Yeah.
Yeah. Just like, I thought he was a scat back when I first watched him. But everything I've gleaned is that like, maybe not, that he's actually pretty hard runner between the tackles. The dude, to me, he's the guy who kind of jumps off the tape as far as just explosiveness.
Yeah. Well, he has that like compact frame, that like Jalen Warren-y frame, that like, maybe
that's what it is. Yeah,
people. Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, Jalen Warren tested horribly. Like
right.
Like that, like people don't realize that Warren was not like this speed freak at all. But when you watch him, he has that like really good acceleration and ability, and that's what you see with RJ Harvey too.
Is this a year like the sweet spot for me, I think, is kind of the late 2nd, early 3rd round of rookie drafts? Are you just like trying to scoop up as many picks in that range as you can? Because there's so many of these profiles that they're just better bets than we usually get in that range, even though plenty of them will miss.
Yeah. Look, this class, I've written about this. Like this class is so much like the 2017 class. It's wild. Where the stuff that I look at from a receiving perspective, like breakout score, reception share, that kind of stuff, like lines up really well. Like those two are the highest classes. I think there might have been one more in there. Maybe that was 2020. One of them in there was like just as strong as these two, or close to as strong, but like it's right there. But then the other thing that's really interesting is that 2017 didn't have that, like some outlier number of running backs that got drafted on day 2 or day 1. I mean, it was like a pretty like normal draft in terms of like top 100 picks. And if you look at NFL mock draft database, like kind of similar right now. And so I'm hoping that that changes and that we get like an absurd number of people that are good. But what I'm trying to say is a lot of the day 3 backs that were drafted in 2017, like there were some of them that very obviously had day 2 profiles, like an Aaron Jones, for instance. And I think we're seeing that again this year. We're going to have plenty of misses, like you said, but I do think that we're bound to see maybe 2 or 3 day 3 hits, which sounds like not a lot, but we usually get maybe 1 every year, So we get like 2 to 4, let's say. Like that's huge for a
that's huge class. That's absolutely huge. Yeah. I did want to ask you a little bit more about Dylan Sampson, who we talked about as kind of the safe bet for draft capital relative to this other group, but he could be 4th round. It's not like he's a lock to go day 2, but I do think his floor is a little higher. Like if if like Devin Neal fell to around 6, I wouldn't be absolutely shocked. I'd be pretty bummed out. But I could see it. Dylan Sampson, probably his floor is like round 4, maybe round 5. But I think he ends up going day 2 ultimately, and kind of a little bit of an undersized guy, a little bit like the speed guy, but like he's not that fast. And I can't imagine his speed score was like particularly strong given the weight of 200. No. But he looks like he's like a very traditional running back to my eye. He's not like someone you've got to get out, running out, get him out to the sideline, get him out on swing passes or anything. Like he can run up the middle, even though he's undersized. So kind of an interesting prospect. His comps of Blake Corum, Devontae Freeman, and Ronnie Hillman are pretty interesting too.
Yeah, my issue with him is that, again, he's a little bit undersized and he doesn't have the receiving profile that I really care about. Like he has a breakout score of 45. He has a best season reception share of 8.5%. And, in last year's class, he would look fine because he at least has that like a really good explosive run rate and like can generate those big plays. So we can latch onto that and say, hey, like this is the unique thing to his profile that's going to make him stand out versus the rest of the class. This class is filled with explosive runs. Like this class has guys who ran unbelievable 40s, have great speed scores, have better size than him and receiving profiles than him. So like, yeah, I mean, if draft capital is there, this is again, goes back to like the Matthew Golden thing or what have you, where I'm going to be grounded at least by draft capital. At the end of the day, like I said this in the Zap in the prospect guide, but the Zap model is there to tell you when to like deviate from draft capital. That's the easiest way to sort of explain what this is doing. And so it's going to say that Dylan Sampson, if he goes on day 2, I would almost guarantee you that he's going to be a high risk player, meaning that his or his Zap score, his overall score is going to look far below where his hypothetical draft capital score would be. So I'm not as into him just because like last year's class, I'd be into him.
Yeah.
But this class just has so many good players in it at running back that I don't feel like I need to go out of the way to stand a 200-pound running back who has a best season reception share of 8.5%.
I'm taking him right now, but in part to like get myself to stop taking Devin Neal because I'm like, this is going to end badly. It's going to end badly. Why are you still taking him?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And Sampson, I'm like, I'm banking probably some CLV when if I get him at like pick 155.
Yeah.
He'll probably move up if he's a 3rd round pick. And post draft, kind of in the same way we're talking about, some of these guys will flip him. I will know who to take over him.
Yeah.
Post draft.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be down to do that. Who among these other backs, it is deep. Like guys we haven't mentioned, Damian Martinez, Brashard Smith, Trevor Etienne, Jaden Blue, Jordan James, Quint Allen, Jarquez Hunter, Ollie Gordon, who was, seen as this clear-cut, fantasy star coming out last year and then has a bad season. Taj Brooks was like viewed as maybe not athletic enough to be an NFL back, but like wasn't as bad as we were worrying. Rocket Sanders, you mentioned. And then Marcus Yarns went to my alma mater, Delaware.
I didn't know that you went to Delaware.
Yeah, Delaware.
You and Joe Flacco, baby. And Joe Flacco also went to Pitt, which is my alma mater.
That's right. Oh, okay. Yeah, he had to transfer to Delaware to get any playing time. So I mean, it's deep. Any of those guys jump out to you at all as kind of sleepers?
Yeah. So I'll say first with Damian Martinez, I'm kind of surprised that so many people really like him. Because his receiving profile sucks. Like it's like non-existent. From 2011 to 2022, we've had 44 running backs get drafted with best season reception shares below 7%. He was at 5.4%, which is like kind of significantly under 7%. Of those 44, only 2 of them scored more than 13 PPR points per game in one of their first 3 seasons. So like, I'm not really in on Damian Martinez. Woody Marks has a good receiving profile, but he also played under Mike Leach, which is why, rest in peace. But that's part of the reason why and actually Max Borghi was his top comp, which was hilarious because it's another Mike Leach running back.
Woody Marks is one of the least aesthetically pleasing highlight tapes I've ever seen. He's just like, you breathe on that guy. He's
I'm not really that into Marks. Jarquez Hunter, I mentioned, he has a really good all around profile. He didn't have like an unbelievable rushing career in college, but He compared to the rest of the class, he was 5th in career avoided tackles per rush, 9th in career explosive run rate. He was 9th in career yards after contact per attempt. He had a breakout score that was 93.8. He looks good in the model. I just don't know if he's going to get the draft capital.
I'm terrified.
Yeah.
Sean Siegel really likes him, and I just, yeah. I mean, and I understand why, but I've been having a lot of trouble getting on board because I just get UDFA vibes from him.
Yeah, I mean, that very easily could happen. And then, I mentioned Rocket Sanders. I think Brashard Smith is actually pretty interesting because, a lot of people are going to make the Tyrone Tracy comp with him because it's a translated receiver conversion going to running back. But it's really good to see that, he performed well with the switch. He's underweight, but this is one of those things where, maybe I think there's at least a chance that a team really falls in love at like the tail end of round 3 and is like, I'm just going to throw this dart and go this direction, but most likely a day 3 guy. But at least with like a day 3 player like this, that there's like something really unique about his profile and you can kind of latch onto that. And it's not the same. Like I was really high on Tyrone Tracy last year because again, I love the receiving aspect at running back, even if they're converted players like this. One of Tracy's comps was Tony Pollard in the guide last year. Brashard Smith doesn't have that. It's not as rosy. Like he gets like Tyler Irvin, Demetric Felton, remember him who was also kind of that like gadgety conversion kind of player. So like I'm a little bit worried about that, but I do think that at least there's like that something that we can latch onto and get excited about.
No, I like Smith. He's kind of a fun dart throw guy. I've been taking Martinez on underdog, especially because he's just a massive man who probably is going to get drafted in like round 4. And
he could still go day 2. That's something that scares me.
Yeah.
My reasoning for saying what I did about Martinez is less about like it's more about post draft, knowing where his capital might be and how people are going to react to that situation. Yeah. I will 100% be out versus where the market's probably going to react to.
Yeah, I totally see that. If he were to like land an awesome spot in round 3 and rock it up, I think I'd have a little bit of trouble. But he's kind of free right now, so I am taking him. Any thoughts on Trevor Etienne? Who like I know I shouldn't be taking Marcus Yarns in best ball drafts, but when I see that Trevor Etienne is at the top of the ranks, I just take Marcus Yarns. So I'm like, what's the difference?
Yeah.
But Etienne, I don't know. He seems to just be kind of like lurking around the day 2, maybe like round 3, round 4 bubble.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, he has a good breakout score because he's a receiver, right? Like he's a receiving back. Like he can do those things. I thought there's obviously 3 comps with each player in the prospect guide, and I thought his middle comp was probably the most accurate is Ito Smith, where maybe could come in a pinch if the other guys on the depth chart are banged up, can be like a pass catching specialist that maybe gets 10 carries in a game every once in a while. But looking into it, some of the stuff does look okay. Like again, he has a pretty good breakout score. Some of the filters that I looked at like didn't look terrible for him, but I'm not like overly high or overly low at this point.
Yeah, no, he's kind of a 3rd round dynasty pick type of guy, I think. But yeah, I mean, he does. My top comp is James Cook, but I may have the brother score turned up too high. All right, do you have any thoughts on the tight end class, which is generally seen as a pretty strong class? I just finished up my tight end write-ups this morning and was pretty in on the top 2 guys, Tyler Warren and Colson Loveland. Do you have any thoughts on this class?
Yeah, I have a tight end model too. It's not as like robust as the running back and wide receiver one, but and I'm still waiting on some like speed scores and stuff like that because it matters a lot more at tight end than it does the other.
I don't know if we're gonna get them for Warren and Loveland. Yeah.
So like some of the guys, like Brock Bowers last year, I just gave him a neutral score. And it'll probably be similar if we don't get it for like Warren and stuff. I think it's a solid class, like an above average class, but I would say, so like the model was pretty into like Sam Laporta when he came out a couple years ago. I'd still say Laporta as a prospect is better, a little bit better than like Warren and Loveland, but it's like kind of in that same conversation from a prospecting standpoint. I have Warren above Loveland right now, but they're in like the elite producer tier. And then the next tier down is where you get Fannin, Arroyo, and then Terrence Ferguson too.
Ferguson popped for me a little bit too.
Yeah, because his speed, speed score was great, and the production wasn't like horrible. That's the thing with tight end. It's like the production's good. Like you want either like great production. You want both. You want great production and great athleticism. But if you had like below average production with great athleticism, I'd rather have that than above average production and bad athleticism. I'd rather have like the better athleticism, maybe like questionable production profile than, I think it's different with like Harold Fannin, who has an elite production profile, like one of the best we've ever seen. His speed score was disappointing though.
Was. Yeah.
You wish that he ran faster just because for obvious reasons. Then you watch him play. He's not really like a down the field break free.
He's a yak guy.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Which is fine. We just have to understand that that's, the way that they'll might even be better from a, if they, just throw a lot of targets his way, closer to the line of scrimmage and be like an Evan Ingram type or something like that. But
Aaron Hernandez actually came up as a comp for
Hernandez. Is a good, that's a really good.
And I've heard that mentioned as a film comp as well. I think Nate Tice, mentioned it, but it might not have been his. But he also comped to like Jonnu. Was on.
That's another great example. Yeah. Not someone who's going to like not get down the field very well and fast, but be able to have like a 4-yard A dot and kind of still be all right.
Yeah. I'm going to be in on Fannin. He's the fact that like I've heard every single time he gets brought up. Did you know he's duck footed?
Yeah.
It's always like, but like, okay, how much are we going to knock him for like looking weird when he runs? Like,
when he has a career yards per hour run rate of 3.
Is this not the time to trust the stats? Like, he looks weird when he runs. I'm sorry, but he's running away from people. Yeah, he's getting yards.
Yeah. I got college football last year when it came out for Xbox, and I used Bowling Green as my team, having no idea who any of these guys were. And
you didn't know who Phantom was? You
had no idea at the time.
Wow.
No idea. And
that was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, he dominated. I'm like, who is this dude? And then everyone starts talking about him. I'm like, all right, this makes a lot more sense.
That's so funny. Yeah. That's exactly what the Bowling Green coaches went through. Oh man. Yeah. Mason Taylor, you didn't mention. He's expected. He's probably going to be the third tight end drafted. Did he do anything for you?
Right now, no. I don't think I have his 40, but he didn't have very good yards per out run numbers, which is what the model is focused on more. At tight end, and I know that he had a good gauntlet drill, right? And at the combine,
I believe so.
Raving about it, and it feels like after that things have really like taken off for him. I don't know. I just right now he's a waiver wire ad category, which is descriptive. I mean, it's basically what you would consider him as, and like from like a redraft standpoint, more of like a streamer type. Whereas like the Arroyo, Fannin, Ferguson tier is a weekly starter tier, right? Maybe like a potential to be like a lower end tight end 1, and then the elite producers, the other 2 are like the plug them in, use them, that kind of prospect.
Tell me more about Arroyo, because he's someone I'm willing to bet on him because of draft capital. He's completely free in best ball drafts, and I think it's a good guy to be mixing in. But I've actually kind of struggled to see it with him. We have one season of production. He tore his ACL. He missed the following season, basically. He tore his ACL in the sophomore year, basically missed his junior year. Didn't play much as a freshman. So you just have like the 1 year. The film stuff on him is like, this dude's a receiver. He's a good route runner. But the production, like how he produced and everything, I don't know. He didn't do much after the catch. So it's like he's got to basically succeed as like a seam stretcher at the NFL level. Feels very kind of boom bust to me. But what did you like about him?
He right now has in the model, I have him projected draft capital at 61. It's 63 now on NFL mock draft database, which is probably higher than people realize or would expect. Or it might be because it's still round 2 in there.
Yeah.
So
NFL likes him.
I mean, I don't think he ran I think he opted to not run the 40 at their pro day, right?
He had a shoulder. Mike Renner had a tweet saying he thought maybe he had a shoulder injury.
Yeah.
But he did not run. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like a lot of these guys, it's like for him, I'd say, versus the rest of the class are the guys that I've inputted right now, because I only end up putting the guys who got drafted in the tight end model. So I'm just kind of estimating. But he has about an average per route run profile from a production standpoint. Is the athleticism there? I'm not sure. It's really just going to be boosted by the fact that he would be a second round pick as to why, he would be in that weekly starter category. Whereas like Harold Fannin, Fannin ranks ahead of him by like 7 or 8 points in Zap score. Arroyo's closer to Terrence Ferguson when Ferguson's projected draft capital right now is 122nd.
Yeah.
To give you that context, right? Like that's where I would almost rather, if Ferguson goes like 30 or 40 picks after Arroyo, I would probably still opt for Ferguson just because we know the speed score and the athleticism is there,
Yeah.
Whereas I don't know if Arroyo is going to like be some special tight end or not. That's the downside of not having the testing for some of these guys. But to me, Arroyo just looks like pretty replacement level wherever he would end up. If he, sounds like he's going to go day 2. It's probably just a regular kind of day 2 tight end.
Yeah, Ferguson, and I was assuming early day 3 capital with him, but he comped to Davis Allen, Dawson Knox, Tommy Tremble, Drew Sample, Tyler Conklin. It's just throw to this guy a little bit.
Fantastic streamers.
Yeah, fantastic streamer. Yeah. Maybe even a starter for a couple years until they draft Dalton Kincaid,
Yeah, right.
The other guys are Rondé Gadsden. I don't know if you looked, because he's a receiver. He's just literally a wide receiver.
Yeah, I have him in here. He had a pretty good yards per out run profile. Again, but he hasn't done it. I don't have his 40 time, so I don't think we have that yet either. But he was also I guess his size is okay enough. Kind of more slender, like lower BMI than some of the other guys.
Right. Yeah, he is 243. So I mean, I think he weighs more than Fannin actually.
Yeah, he does. Fannin's 241, but Fannin's 2 inches smaller, so he's a little bit more compact than Gadsden is.
Yeah, but Gadsden doesn't look weird when he runs. Any thoughts on the quarterback class before we get out of here? I mean, obviously it's not the best class, but but Cam Ward is probably going to go in Superflex rookie drafts, within the first 3-4 picks.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't have a model for quarterbacks because it's just difficult. I really just consume and talk to people about the class, like Jim Sonis, who I worked with at FanDuel and Number Fire for a long time. Had him on the show that actually dropped today, and he has a great model that's pretty. It's like I always like models that are like relatively basic, because when you add stuff, you're usually overfitting and you're not really, you're not focused on the right things, and you're trying to fit Puka Nacua into your hits and stuff like that.
Draft capital doesn't matter, actually.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so Jim has a pretty simplistic way of looking at things, where it's like you look at things like quarterback age, experience, so like games played, and QBR so efficiency as like the main buckets. And there are 2 guys in this class that look good, and everyone else looks pretty bad. The 2 guys in the class that look good are Cam Ward and Jackson Dart. So like that was a pretty interesting conversation to have. So I don't know if any of these guys are going to be like fantasy breaking though. I think Ward might have some chance, but I'm not like overly optimistic that these guys are going to have like insane rushing juice, unless Jalen Milroe ends up just being, an absolute freak and beats the odds and is a much better thrower than what they're projecting to be. But so I'll probably throw darts his way in rookie drafts, just because we know that wild things can happen. And if he gets an opportunity, we know that people in the dynasty world take chances on quarterback, or will take chances on quarterback that have that kind of upside, even if there are glaring red flags, like look at Anthony Richardson. But overall, I'm not like super enthused about the class.
When we did the rookie draft on Ship Chasing, one of my big takeaways was, and I did it like literally on the show, is I need to get Jalen Milroe up in the dynasty ranks, because I mean, he's got some serious red flags, all the same stuff that basically the NFL's worried about. Like, can he execute an offense? Can he not turn the ball over, make mistakes? But he's an incredible athlete.
Yeah.
Like, and he's got a great arm. So,
Right.
you know, it doesn't take much, you know, 3-4 starts at the end of the year. If he's a day 2 developmental guy and gets run, he's going to be worth a lot more than he is right now.
I was looking at Waldman's rookie scouting portfolio yesterday because it came out, and or maybe today or earlier today, but he has him as QB2 in the class. So
Oh
like,
man.
so like there are people, and look, Waldman is someone who will, I mean, he will like stick to his guns, and
Yeah.
that's what we appreciate about him is that
Right.
he's giving us his
He's got a
honest.
process that's
Yeah,
not, he's
yeah.
not
It's
cutting
not
it
gonna be,
with other people. Yeah.
yeah, it's not groupthink at all.
Right.
So you know, obviously, like, but that's what he's seeing, and that's to me not nothing. I mean, that's someone who has been doing this for a very, very long time, and so like, I mean, if there's some people that are in on him, and if there's some people that are in on him, there might be an NFL team that is semi
Yeah.
in on him too.
I like the Jackson Dart call as well. I mean, he has some traits that are fun for fantasy. You know,
Yeah,
he's got a good deep ball. Um, he's like, I guess Shador, I've been, you know, I'm like, I really hope he gets drafted high because
yeah,
his whole deal is that he's sort of like, what if he's Tua? You know,
right,
what if he's Geno Smith? What, you know,
right.
Teddy Bridgewater, but a little better. Like, well, I hope you're in a really good offense then.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, I've had a hard time getting excited about Shador, but I don't know. It's possible. His situation is so weird where he could go number 2, he could go number
I
3,
know.
and then if he doesn't go number 3, he could go like 9 to the Saints.
Yeah,
I've heard someone was pointing out in the comments on one of the videos that the Saints are like big dogs to take a quarterback in the draft market, but I've heard them mention a bunch of times. McShay talks about them taking a quarterback a lot.
yeah,
I think they're pretty live to do it. So
yeah.
there's some like, obviously that's a disaster if you've drafted Sanders at all in best ball. He's not playing much this year at all.
Yeah.
He could go to the Steelers if he were to fall far enough. Maybe they trade up slightly, but then he's probably sitting behind Aaron Rodgers. So it goes
Yeah.
from like instant day 1 starter to like potential developmental guy pretty quickly.
Yeah. I think like those guys in Dynasty can, like I said, can still maintain value because there's
Totally.
always going to be the promise that they start the next year. I mean, JJ McCarthy didn't play at all, and he's still, I mean, it's a great situation, and now he's lined up to be starter, but no one, you know, there were some instances where you could buy, but like, you know, regardless, like I still think that in Superflex, like in a rookie draft environment, best ball environment, definitely would be not really that into going Shador because I don't think he's going to bring you that many. He's not going to bring many spiked weeks either, just given the profile that he's bringing to the table.
Yeah, what do you lose when you lose?
You
With
don't.
Shador Sanders.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the
Uh,
reverse of what we want.
yeah. But like, you know, I from a dynasty perspective, I do think that there's going to be some retained value there because he will get a shot eventually.
Yeah, I agree. One guy that I'm like mildly intrigued by, and like I don't even know. This is like a waiver wire watch list in Superflex, but I would love to see Dylan Gabriel get a shot. I'm convinced he might actually be pretty good. He's too short. He's sort of the like the running back where you're like, you know, super productive, but like he has that one flaw. His flaw is that he's like just way too small to play NFL quarterback. But I don't know. I think he might be pretty good. But yeah, and Milroe's probably the answer for our rookie drafts is that go ahead, like close your eyes and
Yeah,
bet on
it feels a little, not to say that they're the same player, because I actually think that Jackson Dart probably comps to Jalen Hurts more, but it's the Milroe is sort of like the same vibe as what we do. You remember like when Jalen Hurts, when Hurts was drafted in rookie drafts with Hurts, like we were just throwing darts and just saying like, okay, it's like a late second or whatever when we were taking him in Superflex.
Him and Jordan Love were the two kind of
right. It's like, okay, why not just see if this becomes something? And then obviously it paid off massively. So who knows? You should not be very cocky or overconfident in your quarterback evaluation.
He's probably Malik Willis, but
right.
What if he's Malik Willis, who we get excited about at the end of the year because he gets starts?
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
All right. That'll do it. Thanks so much for your time, JJ. This was a ton of fun. Let the people know where they can get the late round prospect guide.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you having me. As always, I love doing the show with you each year. Lateround.com. Check it out. I will have an updated version. The final night of the NFL draft, it'll be out. So you guys will be able to crush your rookie drafts right away.
Oh,
yeah. With post draft scores, new write ups, all that good stuff. And then the late round podcast you can find on lateround.com as well.
Yeah. And we talked a lot of prospects. We did not, like, you have Ulysses Bentley.
He might be the worst running back prospect in the database. Like, legitimately. Well,
he's got a score of 4.1. So
yeah, it's really, really rough. Yeah. I did every single wide out and running back who are at the combine have a profile.
Love it. Yeah. Love it. All right. We'll be back here. I'm going to be doing a Legendary Sickos with Eric this week. We'll be back on Friday doing some best ball streaming. So plenty more content on the YouTube feed. We'll see you guys soon. Thanks for watching. Later.